We welcome in our first guest in our 2020 Giants.com Giants Huddle mock draft, and that is Dan Hoard, who's the play-by-play man for the Cincinnati Bengals. Dan, no one off the board yet here for the Bengals. Where do you kind of see the Bengals as a franchise now in their second season under head coach Zach Taylor?
In desperate need of a new starting quarterback, John, and this pick was basically made back on November 16th. When Tua Tagovailoa dislocated his hip against Mississippi State. I think until that point, Tua and Joe Burrow were probably running neck and neck in the battle to be the number one overall pick. But now it's the easiest number one overall selection since the Colts took Andrew Luck in 2012. Joe Burrow will be the number one overall pick.
Is there anything that any team could do, Dan, in your opinion, if they call the Bengals up on Thursday, the day of the draft at noon, and, they don't have to drop back far. Maybe you drop back to 3 or 4 or 5 or something like that could convince the Cincinnati Bengals to move this pick?
Well, sure. If the offer was ridiculous enough, anything's possible. But keep in mind that back in 1999, the Bengals turned down the entire New Orleans Saints draft plus a first-round pick the following year, and took Akili Smith. So they've turned down generous offers before, and I don't see anybody, the Dolphins included, offering something crazy like 4 or 5 first-round picks. So sure, it's possible. Anything's possible, but I don't think it's going to happen.
And, Dan, we're going to talk again when the Bengals selected pick 33. Now you have the quarterback on board. What's next for the Bengals? What are you thinking about there at the top of round 2?
The Bengals will be hoping that one of the top linebackers on their board is available at number 33 overall. If that turns out to be the case, the Bengals will pounce. If that is not the case, then I think it becomes realistic that they might trade down in the second round to try to get another second-round pick or a third-round pick. But if one of their top linebackers is available, that's the biggest need on the roster, and that's where the Bengals will go.
Dan, excellent stuff. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll talk to you later on in this mock draft. I hope you and your family are safe, and we'll talk to you soon, okay?
Sounds good, John. Thanks.
That's Dan Hoard, play-by-play man for the Cincinnati Bengals. Now let's go and stay on the radio side and talk to Larry Michael, who, of course, is the radio play-by-play man for the Washington Redskins. Larry, good to hear from you. Hope everything is well and safe down there. Let's start here before we get to your actual pick. Dwayne Haskins, where do you think the Redskins as a franchise organization, I'll throw the new coaching staff in too, kind of stand and see what Dwayne Haskins did in his rookie year?
Well, I mean, Ron Rivera said it. He talked about it. He said it many, many times that, he wanted to see Dwayne as soon as Ron got the job. He wanted to see Dwayne put the time in to take over the leadership reins on the team and work hard and realize there's always competition on the football team. And I think up until, we were asked to leave because of, the quarantine situation, Dwayne had been at Redskins Park every day during the off season, doing his own thing, obviously, but lifting and working out and just putting time in. So I think the team has seen what they wanted to see out of Dwayne. Unfortunately, that ended, back in March, middle of March. So very unique situation. I think the speculation, obviously, on the off-season programs, what it's going to be, if it's going to be, we're going to have camp, all the things that we really don't know an answer to, kind of factor into, an unknown. But I think the team is solidly behind Dwayne. He played well at the end of last year. He showed he's got a lot of ability. Yeah, he's a super kid, very humble kid. And so I think the sky's the limit for him. Would he have liked to have had, some time with the new offensive coordinator and the new coaching staff? Of course, who wouldn't? But, this is the cards that everybody has been dealt, and how they play these cards and how they deal with the situation when it does come time to football is going to show, who handled it best.
Where'd you see his most growth in that last part of that season from an on-the-field and off-the-field standpoint?
I just think the decision-making on the field improved so dramatically. And I'll be honest with you, he told me at the beginning of the year, he said, once I get a chance to get in there and play, you're going to see me improve, because that's a similar MO to what he did in college. When he finally got in there, he only played 1 year at college. When he finally got in there, he really lit it up.
Yep.
And, he had a couple rocky moments. Obviously, you witnessed one of them. But, I think by the end of the year, he had a comfort level being on the field, speed of the game, being able to make decisions. The kid's got all the physical ability in the world. And probably a little quicker than we thought, probably a little more mobility in the pocket than we might have been led to believe. And he's working on his strength during the off season. I just think, again, sky's the limit for him. And under normal circumstances, I think, you really would be raving about the prospects. And I still am. I'm still very, very excited about what he can do this year. It's just that unknown factor of not being able to get together with your teammates. But again, every team is facing the same thing, so it's not unique for him.
All right, so Larry, let's lock it in. Second overall pick, Joe Burrow off the board at number 1. A new coaching staff, don't even have the front office fully in place yet. Where do the Redskins, do you think they're going to go at number 2?
Well, my personal opinion is the obvious decision because, Chase Young is one of the best players out there, a position that is an impact position, a position that would certainly help the rest of that defensive front realize their potential. It's the defense last year that was rated near the bottom of the National Football League in a lot of categories, but I thought the talent on that defensive front was such that was a kind of an aberration, but you are what your record says you are. So I'm picking him. And if obviously we get out and get everybody on the same page, build some chemistry on that defense, I think he'll be a major factor this year. So hey, we're sticking with the predictable here.
Finally, Larry, is there anything you think another team could put on the table and offer the Redskins for them to move out of this spot, or do you think Chase Young is too easy and obvious of a selection?
Well, I've been around. Never say never. You should always obviously listen to what people have to say. But if that doesn't happen, then I think the obvious selection is the most logical one. And we'll find out here in a little bit. But you never know. You really never know about the draft. That's what makes the draft so intriguing. Players and teams might end up places that you might not have expected the day before the draft. So we'll see. We'll see on April 23rd. But I really like the kid. He's a local kid. Grew up right in the shadow of the stadium, literally. And so the Redskins have added a lot of local kids this year, ironically enough, to the roster. So it will be a locally flavored team, that's for sure.
Thank you, Larry. Hope you and your family stay safe, and we'll talk to you down the line.
Same to you. Hope to see you guys during the season, obviously, and everybody up there stay well.
That's Larry Michael, voice of the Redskins on radio. Now let's turn our attention to the Detroit Lions. They have the 3rd pick overall in this draft. Want to remind people we're not doing trades, but we will talk about them. Joe Burrow, number 1. Chase Young, number 2. So far, we are very chalky. We'll see if it changes with our 3rd guest. That is Jeff Risdon. He is the editor for the Lions Wire. We talked to him at the Combine. Let's see if his mind has changed at all about what the Lions might do here at number 3. Jeff, thank you for being with us. Hope you and your family are safe. Let's start here. Where do the Lions stand as a franchise? Matt Patricia heading into, I believe, year number 3, and have not gotten where they've wanted to go since the hire. So what's the general outlook here for the Lions heading into the 2020 draft?
Yeah, they have not. They've not done as well as they wanted to do when they were hired. They were given a 9-17, and they've won 9 games in the 2 seasons since then. That's going in the wrong direction. They are Bill's still around. Matthew Stafford at quarterback. He is recovered, hopefully, anyways, from his back injury. He's had them 2 years in a row, but they still seem very committed to having Stafford lead the offense. They have decent weapons at wide receiver, though none long term. Defensively, they need a lot of help. They've made some changes. They got some smart free agent acquisitions, but they lost Darius Slay to the Eagles. So they're sort of looking for impact talent, specifically on the defensive side of the ball is their biggest need right now. And they're in a situation where they have to win this year. That's been a mandate from ownership for Patricia and general manager Bob Quinn. They're both on a hotter seat than they would like to be because they just haven't had the successes they've wanted so far.
So with that said, Jeff, how much will they entertain a trade down in this scenario if they're prioritizing getting as good of a player as they can so they can win as many games as they can so everybody can keep their jobs?
Yeah, and that's the delicate balance. When you're picking at 3 or 4 or 5, you're getting an impact talent right away, and you don't expect to be picking there very often, so you sort of want to take advantage of that. At the same time, if you have a lot of holes, it makes sense to trade back a couple of spots and pick up an extra first or another day 2 pick or something like that. I think they will entertain trade offers, but they won't go far. The 2 players that they really want, one of them's already gone in Chase Young, and the other player probably wouldn't last past 5 or 6. Those spots make a lot of sense because the Chargers and the Dolphins are there. They both need quarterbacks. Will they make a move up to Detroit to get them? Miami certainly has the arsenal to do it, giving up an extra first-round pick this year. The Chargers would be a little bit more complicated, but they could make that work as well. I expect that the Lions will certainly listen and entertain trade offers if they can get it, but I think they'd also be happy sticking at number 3, especially if it means making sure that they get the guy that they really want.
All right, so if the thought then is that they can move down a few spots, what do you think they would be able to get in return in a deal like that? What would be their priorities and goals?
They will definitely want to get that either number 5, number 6 pick. There's a possibility that Arizona at number 8, but that's probably further than they would like to fall. I'm not sure that the Cardinals are all that interested in moving up anyways. They definitely need at least one day 2 pick, probably 2, and a first-round pick next year would make a lot of sense. And I'll tell you what they would do. They would use that first-round pick from next year to probably package with one of the extra day 2 picks this year and move up and get another player this year. They really do seem to like what they have in this draft. They do have an advantage this year by coaching at the Senior Bowl. They get to know a lot more prospects than a lot of these other teams have done before everything closed down and got crazy. They'd like to take advantage of having that advantage.
All right, Jeff, let's take a look then at who the Lions might choose here. I'm sure you're not surprised that Joe Burrow is off the board. I'm sure you're disappointed, but not surprised that Chase Young is off the board. So what are you thinking here for the Lions at 3? Because this is obviously a pick that could very much impact the Giants at 4.
Yeah, and in this situation, the only real choice that they have is Jeff Okudah, the cornerback from Ohio State. They got rid of Darius Slay. They run the Patriot-style defense where they go for coverage ahead of pressure. Now, that doesn't mean that they don't need pass rush. They certainly still need pass rush help. But they lost Darius Slay. They replaced him with Desmond Trufant, who's probably best as a number 2 these days. Okudah can come in right away. I believe I told you guys this at the Combine. He took over for Denzel Ward at Ohio State. He's a much better prospect than Denzel Ward, who went number 4 overall to the Cleveland Browns and made the Pro Bowl as a rookie. He has that kind of talent, that sort of impact right away. It's going to be very difficult for them to look past that.
Jeff, excellent stuff. We're going to have you on again when the Lions pick in round number 2, right before the Giants. We'll see who's left on the board then. What other priority do you think the Lions would have in round 2 if they go with Okudah here?
Yeah, they're going to be looking at either pass rush or, again, adding wide receiver. They do need offensive line help more long-term than short-term, but that's certainly something that they will be looking for, and that's an area of the draft where they can get something, too.
Excellent stuff, Jeff. Great stuff. Thank you so much for the time. We will talk to you in round number 2.
Thanks so much.
That's Jeff Risdon from the Lions Wire, the editor for them, and we're chalk early on in this draft. Joe Burrow at 1, Chase Young at 2, Jeffrey Okudah at 3, and we welcome in Paul Schwartz from the New York Post to make the Giants pick at 4th overall. Paul, good to hear from you. Hope everybody is healthy and well. What are your general thoughts here for the Giants at number 4 approach? We haven't really had a chance to see what this new coaching staff is going to do on the field. Dave Gettleman, his 3rd draft. Just what are your overall thoughts here on what the Giants approach is going to be at number 4?
Hi, John. Yeah, you're right. With when there's a new coaching staff, there's the same front office, but with a new coaching staff, there's a different flavor to the draft. Dave Gettleman is going to try to pick players that fit in with what Joe Judge and his assistants looking for. So, kind of uncharted territory. Everybody doing things remotely, really uncharted territory. So, but as you said, so far your first 3 picks have been kind of what everyone expected. So, in this scenario, the Giants are looking at it, and I think it's 2 decisions. Do they sit there and take Isaiah Simmons, maybe the most versatile defensive player to come into the league? I didn't say the best, but the most versatile in a decade. I mean, as far as just versatility. Yeah. Or one of the 3 offensive tackles, Wirfs from Iowa, Wills from Alabama, or Becton from Louisville. I think that is the crux of this discussion because I think personally their number 1 glaring need is an offensive tackle, period. But more than a defensive playmaker, more than anything, they need someone who can start from day 1 at right tackle and then maybe in 2021 start at left tackle. Having said that, you ready for my pick?
If you want to give it to me right off the bat, that's fine. I'm going to follow up with a couple questions, but give me the pick. Let's do it.
Oh, okay. Answer some questions. Let's draw this out.
All right. Well, okay. That's what you call a tease for the audience.
Yes, a tease.
When you look at this, and you've talked to a lot of people around the league, do you think the general consensus is that Simmons would be the quote-unquote higher-graded player than any of the offensive tackles?
Yes, I do. And I think that's really kind of hinting at where we're going here because, if Isaiah Simmons is ranked as the 1, 2, 3, or no lower than 4 on the Giants board, their virtual board now, right? I can't imagine that any of the offensive linemen are ranked higher than that. So now if you have an offensive lineman ranked 4, 5, or 6, you can really make the case you're not being unfaithful to your draft board by picking the 6th best player at number 4 and, passing over the 4. Need does play a big factor here. So that's the big crux of this issue. But, unless the Giants are looking at this through eyes that virtually no other set of eyes in the league is looking at it, the only question about Isaiah Simmons is, in my mind, is he a jack of all trades and a master of none? Is he a guy who can check every box? He can be your slot cornerback. He can be your, straight outside linebacker. He can be a safety. He can cover your tight ends that need to be covered. He can be up in the box. He can rush the passer. So if you're looking at that, you say, okay, no player can check all those boxes, but is he going to be great at any of them? I think that's the only question a talent evaluator would have.
Yeah, and you talk about the new coaching staff. We really don't know what Patrick Graham's scheme is going to look like, and I think maybe more than any player in this draft, we know Simmons is not going to bust. We know he's going to be a good player, right? But I think his level of greatness, Paul, is going to be heavily impacted by how this staff decides to use him.
Well, what we know already is, first of all, I think it's going to be basically like a 3-man line base.
I agree with you.
Kind of 3-4, multiple, but, the higher percentage will be a 3-4. We also know Joe Judge, coming from that Belichick Patriot school, likes versatile players.
Yep.
He likes guys that he can kind of craft and mold. He wants to do something different every week to week, and Isaiah Simmons gives you more flexibility and creativity of any defensive player in this draft. Now, the caveat to that is if you have kind of a one-dimensional system, we want to play this, we want to play the Tampa 2, we want to do this, we want to do that, we want our players to fill the roles, then Isaiah Simmons is kind of like a good pick, but probably not an inspired pick, because Isaiah Simmons is a guy that each week you tell him, Isaiah, you know what, this week I want you to go between the safety room and the linebacker room. And next week you say, you know what, you're in the linebacker room. And then the next week you say, you know what, we're putting a kind of an exotic pass rush package. You got to spend some time in that room. And that, to me, screams Joe Judge. I think what he wants, what Patrick Graham will want, kind of manipulating these players and saying, this week you can do this week you can do that. Who better than Isaiah Simmons to be so multiversed in all these things?
And by the way, one other note, that might be tough to do in the first year. We don't know what type of offseason there's going to be here, Paul. So, he might only be able to figure out one position, in this first year. And that might have to be something you look ahead to in the future, which is fine because the draft is not just about this year. And that'll bring me back to the last question I had before you make your pick. You talked about needed offensive tackle. I'm going to term it a different way. I'm going to term it as team building. You look 2 years down the road, they don't have an offensive tackle under contract after 2021. They don't. And you have a rookie quarterback who you want to know a lot about, right, in 2 or 3 years when you got to start thinking about, well, do we want to give him a second contract? What level is, all that sort of stuff. So does that overwhelm some of the stuff we just talked about with his versatility, highest player on the board, all that stuff, where, not only does the offensive tackle help the team, he helps you learn about your quarterback. And me and you have been through this since 2012 or 13 when that, strong offensive line, the guys started retiring, leaving. These offensive tackles just don't come along often in free agency or in the draft. This is a pretty unique year.
A couple of things there. First of all, the draft doesn't end in round 1. Okay, the Giants have, the 36th pick in this draft?
Yep.
I'm not saying they can get an offensive tackle who's going to start from day one, but there'll be somebody out there. So if you can't look at it, I know. When you have a team that needs a lot of needs, as soon as you pick one player, everyone says, what about this, this, and this? We get it. You can't figure out all your problems in one pick. Number 2, I don't disagree that if we say right now they're going to run like more of a base 3-4. So you have, let's say, O'Shane Zimenez and Lorenzo Carter as the 2 outside linebackers. They signed Blake Martinez. He's an inside linebacker. You have Ryan Connolly coming off ACL, but supposedly he'll be okay. So you can kind of figure out who your 4 linebackers are going to be there, and it's okay, right? It can work. There are questions, but you can line up guys and say, okay, we can figure this out. You have David Mayo, who you re-signed. You have a semblance of an NFL group right there, or even better maybe. It's very hard to do that on the offensive line. I don't think they signed Cam Fleming to be a starter at right tackle. I think they signed him to be a backup at both positions, starter only emergency. And who you have, Nick Gates, who's a guy who really is a myth at this point. He did some nice things last year. We have no idea with the new staff. So, look, they have to come out of this draft with a couple of offensive linemen, whether that's with the number 4 pick. I think they need a center. They need to draft a center, not with the 4th pick, but 36 could be a good place to draft a center. Look, I could see a scenario, and I would endorse this. If they want to take an offensive tackle at 4 and take a center at 36, I would have no issue with that. And you say, well, what about the defense? I would say, well, what about the defense? You just hopefully solidified your offensive line for the next 7 or 8 or 9 years. And the defense is the defense. We'll worry about that in the next rounds. And they did, don't forget, sign some guys, Fackrell and Martinez. They did sign some guys on defense. So, it's when you're coming off all these losses, you need a lot of things.
So make your pick, Paul. Who do you got at number 4?
Well, I think it's going to be Simmons. I really do. And the asterisk with that is, I think if the Giants can trade down to 5, 6, 7, get one of the offensive tackles and get another really good pick, I think Dave Gettleman, who has never done it in 7 drafts that he's presided over, I think he would do it. I don't think Simmons, they're looking at Simmons as like they did Barkley. I think it's close, but Barkley was a guy they had to have. And it's very interesting because, right, running back is positional value. A lot of people say you don't take him at number 2. Inside linebacker or linebacker in general, unless he's a monster pass rusher, which Simmons is not, you don't really take him at 4. So this is going against a little the positional value that people like to assign to these spots. But so I think if you can trade down and get Wirfs, Wills, or Becton, bingo, perfect. Now you can really load up on other players and maybe extra second-round pick, that kind of stuff. But standing at 4, which is what we're doing now, Simmons, you plug him into the defense at any one of number levels, and all of a sudden you think you have an impact player on defense.
Well, I got to ask you about the trade down, Paul, before we say goodbye, because I asked Jeff Risdon that covers the Lions about it on the selection before you, and he said the Lions are looking at it the same exact way the Giants would be in terms of what you just said. They feel like they can trade down 2 or 3 spots, still get Jeffrey Okudah, and they'll be swimming. So if that's the case, do you think that trade will be available to the Giants if a team could jump a spot ahead of where New York is with the Lions? How do you think that whole scenario is going to play out?
Well, I agree. It's easy to say trade down. Dave Gettleman's got to trade down. Well, you know what? He needs a trade down partner, right?
Yep.
He has to. Anyone can trade down. You need to trade down that makes it coherent and that you still get a player in your cluster that you want. I think it's going to be hard. I think because of the way this year is going, the way it's going to be such a funky draft that teams may not wheel and deal as much as possible. Being on the clock, having their 10, 12 minutes to get this all done, having remote, calling people. I think the league will be give a little leeway here with some of this stuff, but they're not going to let some team take a half hour because someone's Wi-Fi crapped out. You know what I mean? So, it's just not going to do it. So you have to. It's going to be difficult. So I think with all that, I would say, will the Giants trade down? I would guess no. I think they'll be fine sitting there and taking Simmons, but. Look, these offensive tackles are good players, but as we all know, there's 3 of them, right, who are ranked very high, and are all 3 of them going to be really terrific players? Probably not, right? That's just the way it works. So the key is picking the right one, and also, or going with Simmons, who I think the bust factor on Simmons is very low, very low. So, I can't see him not being a good pick.
Paul, I'm with you. We appreciate the time, my friend. Start putting the thinking cap on. We'll get back to you at 36.
All right. Take care, John. Thank you.
That's Paul Schwartz of the New York Post. Now we go down to the man that covers the Miami Dolphins for the Miami Herald. Armando Salguero does a great job. He joined us a little bit earlier in the year, and he joins us now to talk Dolphins. Armando, first of all, hope you and your family and everybody in your world is doing well amidst a very unique time in our nation's history.
Yeah, all is well, John, down here. I appreciate you asking. We're expecting things to get a whole lot better a whole lot sooner than what some people are thinking. But always optimistic that the country's going to bounce back and America's going to be America.
Yeah, we're with you 100% up here, my friend. And luckily, because we are America, we talk some NFL football, and the draft is going to be the only story in town coming up here. So we know who the first four guys are. Shouldn't be that big of a surprise off the board in our reporters' mock draft. It's Burrow, it's Chase Young, it's Okudah, it's Simmons. Dolphins at number 5, Armando. Everybody thinking quarterback? Do you think the organization is also thinking quarterback?
If they're not, they're thinking getting fired because they absolutely need a quarterback, and they need it immediately because it's only been like 20 years since Dan Marino retired, and they've got through 21 starting quarterbacks. So, yeah, absolutely, quarterback is the priority and job one this draft.
All right, so what are you hearing about what the Dolphins think of these prospects? And I guess most importantly on Tua, because he's really the big question here. How are they dealing with the medical portion of that? I don't need to rehash for you the Drew Brees, Dante Culpepper incident down there in Miami about 10 years ago that kind of changed the direction of the franchise. How are they handling Tua in the medicals, considering their doctors are not going to be able to get their hands on him personally?
Right. It's a problem. It's a challenge. And so, therefore, there's going to be a lot of unknowns regarding Tua. I think that the Dolphins are going to look at this as there's a lot of unknowns with every quarterback that you pick. It's a 50-50 proposition most of the time, even in the first round. And with Tua, the belief is that, he's a good player. He's probably going to be a good player. But will he be around? Will he be durable? And that's impossible to predict, even if you do get your hands on him during the normal draft process. This draft process, the team hasn't been able to talk to him in person. The team hasn't been able, there was no pro day that they went to. There were no dinners. There was no visits. And obviously, the doctors didn't see him. Having said that, I'm thinking that's the way that they're going to go.
Okay, so we will make that official in a moment. But do you think the Dolphins will just hang out at 5 and wait for whomever they might want to get to them? Or do you think they might launch a quote-unquote preventive strike here or preemptive strike to move up a couple spots so a team like the Chargers or the Panthers or somebody else we're not thinking about might jump ahead of them to grab the QB they're looking for?
Well, I hear that the Chargers really like Justin Herbert, and he's everything that Tua is not physically, although not from a production standpoint. Herbert is 6'6", 238 pounds, not hurt, hasn't been hurt for several years after he had a collarbone injury early on in his career. So he is a clean physical prospect. As good of a prospect from a production, from a play standpoint, from a performance standpoint. So it's 6 of one, half dozen the other. It's hard to predict the Dolphins trading up, especially when, the price is going to be prohibitive. And they have the wherewithal to do it. The Dolphins have 2 second-round picks in addition to their 3 first-round picks. But they also have a ton of problems in that they have a roster with a lot of holes.
So I've heard from Daniel Jeremiah and a couple other people that it's still split right now in the Dolphins front office, Armando. Is that what you're hearing as well, where one faction likes Herbert, one likes Tua? And let's make the pick right here in the context of that answer. Who do you think the Dolphins will select at number 5?
Yeah, so I reported in February that Tua to the Dolphins was not as cut and dried as everyone thought, and that there was a building and strong contingent of Justin Herbert is the better pick people within the Dolphins organization, and they really like the guy, and for obvious reasons. But having said all that, I think that the Miami Dolphins will overlook the gamble of Tua Tagovailoa durability issues for the future, and they're going to make this pick in the present, and they're going to pick Tua Tagovailoa.
And you think a chance of a trade up then is slim, since they would apparently be happy if they got either one?
Well, let me be diplomatic about this. In this draft, I didn't have to do
it. Okay, so it's still on the table. That's what I want to hear. All right, we got 2 more picks for you, Armando, in the first round, and obviously we have to find out who goes before you can make them. 18th overall, 26th overall. You mentioned a couple of second-round picks, a third-round pick, 3 in the 5th. You guys are all over the place. 3 7th-round picks. So you guys pretty much own this draft. What are you thinking in terms of those next 2 picks? What are the needs? Is it simply best player? And are we going to see some wheeling and dealing by the Dolphins at some point because of their volume of selections?
Yeah, that changes the whole dynamic. Once you don't have to make the trade to get to up early in the draft, you definitely can move around later on, and the price is a whole lot cheaper. I would say now that they've got a quarterback with an injury history, it would behoove them to protect the quarterback with the injury history. The Dolphins' offensive line, arguably, not a whole lot better than what the Alabama offensive line has been, because Alabama last year had or will have a first-round pick in this draft, offensive lineman. We'll have another one next year who was an offensive lineman, and had one last year who was an offensive lineman. 3 first-round picks in the NFL on that offensive line. So I'm thinking offensive line for the Dolphins later on in the first round, and that includes the possibility of trade up to get one of the premier tackles.
Armando, we really appreciate it. We will talk to you later on in the draft. Stay safe, my friend.
Thank you.
We say thank you very much to Armando Salguero for joining us. He covers the Dolphins for the Miami Herald. Now we go out to the West Coast, the LA Times, and Jeff Miller covers the LA Chargers. I didn't call them San Diego. That's a win for me. Out there, he is the beat reporter that covers him for the LA Times. And Jeff, let's start here. Just, the moves happening to the new stadium, just kind of where are the Chargers now as a franchise? They're moving on from Phillip Rivers. It's kind of the start of a new era. So what do you think the coaching staff and the front office is thinking heading into the 2020 draft from a broad-based perspective?
Yeah, it definitely is the dawn of a new time here for the Chargers. No question. Phillip Rivers, 14 seasons. He started 235 games in a row. So that's all coming to an end now. And moving into the new stadium, I think the big picture of this is they understand that they're moving into a new time, and they're going in a completely different direction on offense. And they're going to build a defense and try to have a kind of multifaceted offense that can run and throw the ball. And they're going to do all that while trying to prepare for the future and trying to win right now, because they need to win. This isn't a situation where they're in a 5-year rebuild or something. These guys have to win. They're coming off a season where they won 5 games. Another 5-win season is not going to work, and it would result in some pretty major changes. So they're in that situation where they're kind of transitioning, but they also they need to win. And that's there's a lot of people who, they're going to be feeling a lot of pressure this season to moving into the new stadium to put something out there that people are going to want to buy tickets in the city. And so there's a lot of pressure, and this is a very big draft.
So it seems like there's some competing interest here, right? If their really interest is to win now with what could be a non-existent or abbreviated offseason, is it quarterback or bust, or is there a consideration to just rolling with Tyrod Taylor and just trying to put enough around him so the team can make a run at the playoffs with a veteran quarterback?
Yeah, I think ideally and I think we're talking about, you mentioned, we don't know what kind of offseason we're going to have here, what kind of a preseason we're going to have. This could be a situation where a lot of these rookies we're talking about don't play a whole lot as rookies. These draft picks we're talking about don't play a lot as rookies because they may not get the work in that's necessary. We might see them play more as the season goes on or later in the year. So I think the Chargers, I think they're okay with Tyrod Taylor. I know a lot of people have questioned that along the way, and there's been a lot of Cam Newton talk, and of course they were in on Tom Brady, and I think that was kind of a unique situation that they tried to take a shot at, and it didn't work for them. But I don't think the Cam Newton thing interests them. I think they are committed to getting a young quarterback, one of these young guys in the draft, and trying to build with that guy. But at the same time, I think they're perfectly comfortable going into the season. I know Coach Anthony Lynn is very comfortable with the idea of Tyrod Taylor being his quarterback. I think they can win with him, and I think in 2020, that's what we're going to see. These guys trying to win and trying to advance into the postseason with Tyrod Taylor as the quarterback.
So, Jeff, does this mean that, look, a lot of people here in New York are talking about the opportunity for the Giants to trade down, and one of the teams they always talk about are the LA Chargers at 6. So, given everything you're saying to me, how likely do you think a Chargers trade up to 4 or maybe even 3 or 2 ahead of the Giants is going to be leading up to the draft?
I think they're looking at all these scenarios very closely. You know, we've heard a lot in the last few weeks about the Dolphins maybe split on Herbert and Tua and where that might land. Obviously, that is something that Chargers are very interested in. I think they would look at the possibility of moving up if they really value one of those guys. And I don't. I know they like Herbert. I've heard that from the beginning. I think the idea of if they could get Tua, I think they would. Personally, I think it'd be a great move for them. I think reading between the lines from what Anthony Lynn and Tom Telesco, the GM, has said, I don't think they have major questions in terms of the injuries go. I think they have a good feel of that. I think they like the prospect of having a shot at Tua, and I think they'll be looking at that. It wouldn't shock me one bit. They moved up to get Melvin Gordon a few years ago, so Telesco has done that, and I think they're exploring that. And I like a lot of these teams, if they're open for business, as they say. I think they would look at that. The issue they have, of course, the Dolphins have much more draft capital rather to trade, to move up and to give up than the Chargers do. But I absolutely, I think they're interested in all those possibilities.
All right, make the pick for me. Chargers heading to the podium at number 6.
With Tua off the board, I think they're going to have to take Herbert. I think. Personally, I think they'd have more interest in Tua. I don't know that for a fact, but I think if he's not there, I think they're going to have to go with the quarterback, and the other option would be one of the offensive linemen. But I think in this situation, you don't get a chance to pick this high very often. You don't want to pick this high very often. Obviously, you don't want to have the record that puts you in that spot. But I think when you're in that spot, that they're that high, I think you have to look at one of these quarterbacks, draft the best one that's still available, and hope you can make it work with him moving forward. I think that's what the Chargers will do.
Jeff, awesome stuff, my friend. We appreciate it. Stay safe out there.
Okay, thank you. You too.
All right, let's jump now to pick number 7 in the draft. We go from Jeff Miller out there in L.A. to Jordan Rodriguez, who covers the Carolina Panthers for The Athletic. Jordan, thanks a lot for joining us. A new regime there in Carolina. So what's the general thought here as this franchise kind of goes to reset here and moves on from Cam Newton?
Yeah, there have been a lot of changes. I feel like every time my phone goes off, I'm now getting a twitch in my eye because it's probably Panthers news at some point. So, it's been crazy out here. And they've done a lot in free agency to shore up the offense, or at least get a lot of bridge guys, for lack of a better word, kind of in to be placeholders until they can really get in there and develop some young guys. And so that makes me believe they're going to go defense heavy. Matt Rule called Phil Snow the defensive coordinator. His secret weapon, says he's never won a football game really without him. Statistically, that is true. And so, I think they're going to really want to go defense first. They got the offensive coordinator, Joe Brady, all the toys, including quarterback Teddy Bridgewater, in free agency, and a couple receivers. Robbie Anderson, a familiar face for you guys, I think, and now I think they're going to go defense in the draft.
So I guess, Jordan, my question then would be, do they see Bridgewater as not just a quote-unquote bridge guy like you just mentioned, or is he the guy for the future, which would obviously rule a quarterback out as a potential either trade up this year or just picking one if he's there at number 7?
So I don't think they'll pick a quarterback at 7. I think that with Bridgewater, they've structured his deal to where they are giving themselves time to figure him out. And what I mean by that is they know that he doesn't have a ton of starting experience yet. Not his fault, obviously, that horrible injury his rookie season. in Minnesota, but they have him essentially on a 2-year deal with an option out before the 3rd year of it. So they are kind of giving themselves time to see if he can be the guy for them in their offense, particularly as they kind of put all the pieces together with Joe Brady in this offense, and obviously just signed Christian McCaffrey to a pretty monster extension. And so they're going to see if the pieces click the way they think they will, and they're going to give themselves a year or two to do that. Now, that doesn't preclude them from drafting a quarterback at some point and developing him. They also have P.J. Walker, who they are super high on, who's an exciting prospect for them developmentally. So that means to me, I don't think at 7 it's going to happen. I wouldn't rule it out in general. But with Teddy, it seems to me that this contract is structured to where they're seeing what he can be when given the tools, when given the keys to the starting the car, when he's basically being told, hey, this offense is yours now. Let's see what you can do with it. And it's basically his job to earn long term.
So is this just total BPA territory here where it's best player? We don't really care so much where they play, or are there specific needs you think they're looking to fill in the now?
You know, with them, I think a lot of fans wish that they could say, go get the best player available. They would be disastrous if they went and did that, I think. This football team can't even roster a starting defense at this point. They lost their nose tackle. They're starting outside corner, James Bradbury, again, a guy who you're very familiar with, who matched up against Julio and Michael Thomas and Mike Evans. Now the division has Tom Brady in it. They lost Luke Kuechly. They lost nose tackle, a 3-tech. Like, it's a disaster, man. Like, it's really bad. So I think that they're going to have to go best player available within their set of needs, and those needs for them, I guess, thankfully, if you're wanting to put a positive look on it, thankfully they could essentially pick at any of those positions high up in the draft, especially at 7, and still come away with a guy that they need who could probably help them and needs to start for them on day 1.
Yeah, I was going to say, it sounds like the needs do actually match up with who might be there. So 3 quarterbacks are off the board. No Isaiah Simmons, no Jeffrey Okudah, no Chase Young. Jordan, who do you think the Panthers will select at number 7?
I'm going to go with Javon Kinlaw out of South Carolina, and I know that this is a curveball because he still is a little bit raw, and I know a lot of people have Derek Brown as their top defensive tackle off the board. I do think Derek Brown's possible for them, but in terms of this new coaching staff and what I've gotten to know about them so far, they really, really are looking to bring in guys who are going to be superstars for them, not right now, but in the next 2 to 3 years when they're ready to finally start winning sustainably, have rebuilt this roster, especially on the other side of the ball. And so that, to me, speaks about Javon Kinlaw, who I think a lot of people understand that he can be sufficient and do well against the run, but where he can really help this defense and what they want to do is align in a lot of variations to rush the passer. And so for them, someone who can really be a catalyst and a factor like that immediately and then develop into something where we don't even know how high his ceiling is yet, I think that that's something extremely promising for them, and a total Matt Rule guy, where if it's successful, he's going to be a core guy that they'll have around for several years. I
get the feeling you would have liked to see Isaiah Simmons sitting there as a potential Luke Kuechly replacement.
Yes, I would have. I think that would have been the guy, but someone snatched him away.
Yep, that will be Paul Schwartz in the New York Post. Jordan, we'll have you on later on. I want to ask you to talk about James Bradbury in more depth, but just give me a little footnote here, thumbnail, on Bradbury as a guy and a player who the Giants signed as a free agent this offseason.
So we'll talk about this more in detail, I'm sure. James Bradbury and I got to the Panthers at the same time, and so I feel like I watched him grow up in a sense, and I cannot say enough good things about that guy as a human being, first and foremost, and as somebody who I don't think he's scratched the surface of his potential yet either. He's had, several different coordinators. He's had several different secondary coaches, defensive backs coaches, and it's been changed. Nothing's been consistent but him in that secondary year over year for the last 4 years. And so for him to shoulder all of that and now go to somewhere that they are truly telling him, hey, we're going to give you stability for the next several years, I think that's huge, and I think he's going to be a star up there.
Well, you made a lot of Giant fans happy, Jordan. We appreciate the time. Thanks so much, and enjoy the next week or a few days leading up to the NFL draft.
Thanks, John. Always a pleasure.
That's Jordan Rodriguez, does a great job covering the Carolina Panthers for The Athletic. And now we head out to Arizona, to Darren Urban. He covers the Cardinals for the team website. Darren, thanks for being with us. Year 2 of your new head coach and new regime. You drafted Murray last year to be your franchise quarterback. What do you see as the major needs for the Cardinals here heading into year number 2?
Well, they're fortunate enough that they did some nice things in free agency to the point where their major needs, I think, for the short term were basically covered. They had holes at pass rusher, at inside linebacker, at wide receiver, and even right tackle. And they've managed to fill those. They got Jordan Phillips on the defensive line. They got Devondre Campbell to play inside linebacker. They got Devon Kennard to play outside linebacker. They traded for DeAndre Hopkins. Obviously, that wide receiver was a place where they needed some help. And then they brought back Marcus Gilbert and Justin Murray, the two guys, the one who was supposed to be the right tackle last year, Gilbert, who before he got hurt, and Justin Murray, who slowly got better all through the season, surprisingly so. So they put themselves in a position where they can go in a lot of different directions depending on how the draft plays out at number 8.
Do you think more likely a trade up, more likely a trade down, or do you think this is a stay put and pick situation for the Cardinals?
I think the Cardinals are, and I think Steve Keim would love to trade down. We'll see who's on the board at the time and if anybody wants to move up. But again, I think because of how they maneuvered, I think this is a perfect place. They lost their second-round pick in the Hopkins deal, so they don't have a second-round pick right now, and I'm sure you'd love to pick one back up. And if you can drop down a few spots and pick that pick up when you know you don't really absolutely have to have anybody here, I think that would be the most palatable thing, but we'll kind of have to see how that plays out.
All right, so Darren, tell me, who's your pick? Who do you believe, and this is predictive, this is not your preference, who you think the Cardinals will pick, given who is off the board? And I will give it to the folks again. The 3 quarterbacks, Burrow, Tua, Herbert, Chase Young, Okudah, Javon Kinlaw just went to the Panthers, Isaiah Simmons to the Giants. Who is the Cardinals pick at number 8?
The Panthers pick, my friend Jordan there, surprised me a little bit. I thought they might go with Derek Brown. Obviously, Kinlaw is off the board, and that leaves a lot of nice offensive linemen, but it also leaves Derek Brown. And while I think offensive lineman is a very strong possibility for this team at number 8, the way this board plays out, I'm going to say they take Derek Brown to continually build up this defensive line. And so, yeah, Derek Brown being there at 8, I think would be very intriguing for this team.
All right, well, I'm going to ask you a follow-up, Darren, just for the heck of it. Based on what you're hearing out there, and is there around the league, what's your thoughts on the consensus here of how you rank those top offensive linemen that everyone knows are in that top tier?
You know what's funny is I don't think there is a consensus right now. I don't feel like nationally there doesn't feel like a consensus, and even locally when people start moving around all this thing, where it really goes. If I had to guess out of all those guys, the first names that jump into my head would be Wirfs or Wills if the Cardinals were to take an offensive lineman. But would I be surprised if they took a Thomas? Would I be surprised if they took a Becton? I suppose I really wouldn't. Part of that makes me hesitate because when there's not that one consensus offensive lineman, it makes me wonder how good any of these guys are necessarily considered at this point, which is another reason why you might want to trade down or possibly go in a different direction than offensive line at 8.
Darren, great stuff, my friend. Enjoy watching DeAndre Hopkins this year. I'm sure that was a nice March surprise for you guys. And we'll talk to you down the line. Stay safe, my friend.
Yeah, you too.
We thank Darren Urban. He covers the Arizona Cardinals for the team website. Now we head all the way east across the country to the sunny state of Florida, and that's Mike Duraco. He covers the Jacksonville Jaguars for ESPN. Mike, thank you so much for being with us. I hope you and everybody down there are safe and doing well.
Oh, thanks. Appreciate you having me. And, everybody down here is doing the best we can, I guess. I think like everybody else is.
Absolutely. All right, Mike, let's start here. What do you consider the Jaguars' needs right now?
How long you got? Because there's a long list. Probably their biggest need would be interior defensive line. They lost Calais Campbell, who was a defensive end. Obviously, they traded him to Baltimore, but he lined up inside on pass rush down, so they need to replace that production. Marcel Darius was not brought back because of contract. And that was a huge loss for them because he was probably the key to their run defense. They averaged, 53 yards per game less, against the run when he was on the field as opposed to when he wasn't. So that would be their top need. But, it's almost at every level on the defense. Certainly, safety, corner, trading A.J. Boye away. They've got to find another starting corner. If you look at the offensive side of the ball, certainly tight end's a need. Left tackle would be a need. And any additional help weapon-wise for Gardner Minshew, wide receiver, a pass-catching running back would be a major need as well.
Gardner Minshew, is this kind of, I'm not going to call it a one-year trial, I don't think that's fair, but is this kind of like, all right, kid, let's see what you got in year two?
Yeah, they liked what they got out of him last year. He had the highest passer rating of any of the rookie quarterbacks, threw the fewest interceptions, which was 6. Had some trouble with fumbles, but cleaned that up towards the back end of the year. And they went 6-6 on a team with one of the worst run defenses in the league. Pretty much DJ Chark was the only big play wide receiver they had. Leonard Fournette was 1,600 yards of total offense, so that was good. The offensive line was hit and miss, and they didn't really have a lot of good play at linebacker. So the Jags feel like, if we can get some of those positions solidified, we can find him a few more weapons, maybe he's got a chance to get us to 500, 9-7, and with the extra playoff team, there's a chance. But that's probably a little bit of whistling in the dark because I think they're a year or two away at least to be able to really compete for a playoff spot. But, they're going to roll with Minshew in 2020 anyway, and we'll see how that goes.
All right, Mike, do me a favor. Give me your pick, and you're predicting who do you think the Jaguars will select at number 9? And for the fans out there, just to remind everybody, off the board, Joe Burrow, Chase Young, Jeffrey Okudah, Isaiah Simmons, Tua Tagovailoa, Justin Herbert, Javon Kinlaw, and Derek Brown. Who do the Jaguars select at number 9?
Well, I would have loved to have had Derek Brown available and Javon Kinlaw. I'm kind of surprised they're both gone. So I'm going to go with Tristan Wirfs, the offensive tackle out of Iowa. The Jaguars need an upgrade from Cam Robinson at left tackle. He's not been very good consistently, and you need that, obviously, especially with a young quarterback. Robinson is, he missed 2018 with an ACL. Last year was a little up and down. Played better towards the end of the year, but they really need somebody that they can put on that left side, protect Minshew's blind side, and not have to worry about, fundamentals and footwork issues and all the stuff that Cam Robinson's dealing with. So Tristan Wirfs, the tackle from Iowa, was my guy.
Awesome, Mike. I got to do one follow-up for you because Giant fans are consistently asking me about this on Twitter, and I always say, I don't know what the Jaguars are going to do, but now I can ask you. What's going on with Yannick Ngakoue? Clearly, he does not seem to want to be there. The Jaguars, though, I know Pete Prisco's pretty locked in down there. He says they want at least a number 1 and then some, maybe 2. How do you see this whole thing playing out with Ngakoue?
Yeah, Pete's right. Pete and I are good buddies. He's right on that they want at least a 1. And they, if it's going to be in that 25, 26, 27 range, it's going to have to be more than just a first-round pick. He doesn't want to play here. It is completely 100,000% clear that he does not want to play here. But as you know, in this situation, the Jags hold all the leverage here. They're not going to just give him up. They're going to get what they feel is fair compensation. And I know inside the organization, the feeling is, look, if we don't get what we want, then, we'll keep him. And then it's on him. And he's going to have to decide whether it's I sign the franchise tag and play for $18 million, or I sit out like Le'Veon Bell did 2 years ago and leave $18 million, $17.8 million on the table. So I don't see him being traded before the draft. I think there's a possibility on draft day and maybe after. But I think if I were a betting man, I probably would bet that he would be still on the roster when they go to camp.
One trade I know Giant fans are throwing out there. This is not me suggesting it. This is, questions I've gotten from fans, so I'll throw it out to you, Mike. Would there be any interest of the Jaguars with the Giants to swapping first-round picks 4 and 9, and then maybe the Giants throwing some extra compensation in a deal like that, or is that not attractive enough for Jacksonville to consider a move like that to move up 5 spots?
No, I think that's a very attractive offer, and if I were GM Dave Caldwell, I'd do it. That's the kind of offer I think that it's going to take. to be honest with you. It's going to have to be one of those things where if you look at it and go, I can't turn this down. It's sort of like what happened with Jalen Ramsey last year because, look, if the Rams didn't offer 2-1s, Jalen Ramsey probably wasn't getting traded last year. That's what I was told from people inside the organization, that if that offer hadn't come along, 2 first-round picks, they would have just dealt with Ramsey the rest of the year and tried to figure it out because they just did not want to let a player that talented go. But, if this is an offer, a legitimate offer from the Giants to the Jags, I can't see them turning that down at all.
So that would be moving up 5 spots, and they would trade 9 to the Giants. Giants trade 4 back. That would be what? You would target one of the top DTs? Would you try to look at Isaiah Simmons at that point? What do you think the Jaguars would look for at number 4?
Yeah, probably the one thing would be pray like heck that Okudah slips, which we don't think would happen.
Right,
but
you never know.
No, who thought Josh Allen was going to be around last year at 7?
Bingo.
Or 4, whatever. What was 7 last year? Sorry. So you never know. But I think at that point, then I think Isaiah Simmons would be the guy that you probably would run up there, or Brown or Kinlaw. Personally, I think Brown is probably a little bit better fit for them here, but it's not like they'd throw Kinlaw, out of the building. So I think then they would have a lot of options there. And again, the prayer would be, God, Okudah, please slip. But I don't think that's happening.
Hey, if a team trades up for Tua with the Lions at 3, you never know.
You never know.
Absolutely, Mike. Great stuff, my friend. I really appreciate the time today. We'll talk to you down the road. Enjoy the draft.
Thanks. Appreciate you having me.
We thank Mike DiRocco from ESPN, covers the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now we head out to the middle of America, the Midwest. We go to Cleveland, Ohio. My buddy Aaron Goldhammer, who is a talk show host on ESPN Cleveland. Mr. Hammer, hope you and your family and everybody out there in your neck of the woods is healthy and doing well.
Same to you guys. We're hanging in and doing all we can to try to stay healthy and safe.
All right, more change for the Browns, which is, I guess, more of the same. A new head coach, new front office. Aaron, just kind of where do you see the organization right now in Cleveland? Is this a reset, or are you still trying to build upon what's kind of been done the last couple of years?
Well, last year was one of the most disappointing seasons in Browns history, which really says something. And to some fans, it was even more disappointing when they went 0-16 and didn't win a game, because last year's team was the hot, sexy team in the league that was supposed to take the league by storm and go to the playoffs and compete for a Super Bowl with the brightest young quarterback in the league and the addition of Odell Beckham Jr., and it was just a total unmitigated disaster. Based on that, I'm not surprised that they changed coaches because Freddie Kitchens really was in over his head as a head coach. Good assistant, and I think the Giant fans will see that, but was not a good fit here to be the head coach. And so now they move to Kevin Stefanski, who is much more organized and detail-oriented and sort of fits with an analytics-based model, which is what the Browns are going for. They have the youngest GM in NFL history. Andrew Berry is 32 years old. All the guys in the front office and the coaching staff pretty much are from the Ivy League. They're all really smart. But we're about to find out whether doing well on the SAT translates into being able to actually win football games. I think expectations are still that the Browns could at least be 500, if not better. The most important thing is that they get their quarterback right. Baker was probably the most disappointing player in the league last year. Baker Mayfield threw too many interceptions, was inaccurate, threw 21 picks, was able to make it through 16 games. But he's got to be a lot better and get back to that rookie record touchdown passing form if the Browns are going to take that next step.
You talk about analytics. Do you think because of that reattachment to it, we saw what they did under Sashi Brown, a lot of trade downs, do you think that could be in the cards for the Browns in round 1?
I think the Browns are in a different state of organization than they were when Sashi took over, when they had almost no good young players and not enough assets, and they were just in mode to try to accumulate as many assets as they possibly could. Remember, Sashi also isn't there, so that was sort of his plan, and I'm not sure that this current front office is going to approach things exactly the same way. But the real brainchild behind all of this is former baseball executive Paul DePodesta, who Met fans will remember, who was played by a Jonah Hill in the Moneyball movie. He lives in California, but is maybe the most powerful person in the building in Berea, Ohio. And so I think trade downs and trading down from 10 is a possibility, but I think the Browns are in a mode where they know that they have to start winning, and just accumulating a bunch of future assets isn't going to satisfy the fan base.
All right, so make the pick, Mr. Goldhammer. Fans know who's not on the boards. Who do the Browns want with their selection in the 2020 draft in the first round?
Well, John, the Browns had a Hall of Fame left tackle retire 2 years ago in Joe Thomas, and they've done really nothing to replace him. Undrafted free agents and trying to get guys to change position and signing guys off the scrap heap. This is a very good offensive tackle draft, one of the best we've seen in a long time. I know Tristan Wirfs is gone, and I think the second best one is a 3-year starter in the SEC, has played in some of the biggest games in college football over the course of the last couple of years. I will take Georgia left tackle Andrew Thomas with the number 10 pick to the Browns.
Very good. Very quickly, 2 rapid fires. If you don't go offensive tackle, what do you think is the other option there for the Browns in terms of needs?
It's probably trade down and then look at an offensive tackle. The Browns also have a major linebacker need. They only have a couple on the roster as it stands right now. So if Isaiah Simmons were somehow to be there at 10, I think they would really have a tough decision to make, but I think that's unlikely.
Okay, and then rapid fire for the Giant fans out there. How do they, right now, fans and the organization, you think, view Odell Beckham Jr., and how did you view his only season with the Browns?
It's a major disappointment. He actually stayed pseudo-healthy, although he said that this core muscle injury affected his play. And Odell has to prove this year that he's still one of the top receivers in the league, because if I was making a top 10 list right now at that position, based on the way he played last year, I wouldn't put him in it.
Aaron, good stuff, my friend. Stay safe out there. We'll talk to you down the road.
You too. Thanks, Sean.
So Aaron Goldhammer selects Andrew Thomas, left tackle out of Georgia, the second offensive tackle off the board in this draft, and much to everyone's surprise, 2 in a row here at 9 and 10, Wirfs and Thomas. So we get to the Jets at number 11, and we're joined by Scott Mason. Scott, why don't you tell the folks where they can find your work and your podcast?
You can find the Play Like a Jet podcast on iTunes and all the places that you can get podcasts, Google Play, all that, and at turnonthejets.com as well. And, John, we go back a long way, so I'm going to enjoy saying this to you right now, but let's make it 3 in a row, 3 tackles in a row. What do you say?
That is a good tease, but let's get to the needs first. Besides offensive tackle, and you can explain why that is also a need, despite what the Jets did on the offensive line in free agency, Scott, what are the Jets really in need of to try to take that next step with Adam Gase as their head coach this year?
Well, John, they don't need much except for edge rusher, cornerback, wide receiver, an entire new offensive line. So basically, you know, all the key positions on the football field, more or less.
Okay, so they did a lot of work on the O-line in the offseason, right? So why do you think, and what spots in that line do you think there are still very big needs?
Well, the problem is most of the guys that they got are just Band-Aids. So they signed Greg Van Roten from Carolina, but he comes in on a glorified one-year deal for backup money. He is maybe a decent enough starter for a year, but he's 30 and he's a career journeyman. George Fant is a guy they brought in from Seattle, but he's on a glorified one-year deal. He's 28 and never really been a full-time starter, and quite frankly, he's still kind of learning the position, so nobody knows what they're getting out of him. And then you talk about Alex Lewis, who they brought back. He was okay when he played last year, but he's missed an average of 6 games a year since his career started 4 years ago. So they really don't have any long-term answers on this line except for Connor McGovern, the center that they signed from Denver. So even though they made a lot of changes in the offseason, I don't think there's very many long-term answers here, and they really need a lot of youth and talent on that line. And I think we can both agree, because the Jets and Giants are in similar situations with the young quarterback who needs protection, that the Jets need to build a solid foundation on that line if Sam Darnold is going to be able to do what most Jets fans are hoping he does and take that next step as a franchise quarterback.
All right, I'll have a follow-up for you, Scott, but make your pick here. The Jets selecting at number 11 overall in the 2020 NFL Draft.
At number 11, the Jets select the guy that I think is the best tackle in this draft, Jedrick Wills from Alabama. He's, I think, not only an excellent athlete who's overshadowed by Wirfs and Becton, who are just freaks, but he's also somebody who's got the best technique of anybody in this draft, a terrific pass protector, a mauler in the run game. The only real questions with him are whether or not he's going to eventually play left tackle, because he was exclusively a right tackle at Alabama to protect to his blind side. But I think eventually, if you work with him, you should be able to transition him if you choose to. Otherwise, not a bad problem to have, having an excellent right tackle there for a really long time. And sometimes there's questions about focus, stuff like pre-snap penalties, rather. And I think that's easily coachable. So the Jets are thrilled to get Jedrick Wills at the number 11 pick.
How tough was it for you to pass up your pick of the litter of this excellent wide receiver class?
Not even the slightest bit, to be honest with you, John. I'm camp offensive line all the way, because I think all four of these top four offensive linemen, the two that went before, Kristen Wirfs and Andrew Thomas, and even Mekhi Becton, who's still on the board as we speak, all four of those guys in almost any year would be OT1. This just happens to be a class that's stacked at the top. The wide receivers are really, really good. Jerry Jeudy, CeeDee Lamb, and Henry Ruggs are all going to be really good receivers, I think. But the thing is, ultimately what it comes down to is teams that build in the trenches are the ones that are the winners. The teams that have a pass rush, the teams that protect their quarterback and are bullies in the run game as well, those are the teams that are long-term contenders. And I think if you want to go back to the times when the Jets were their most successful, I mean, in the most recent run where they were successful was after they had signed Faneca and Woody, and after they had drafted Brick and Mangold, and they built up a really strong offensive line. I think if you can get a piece like Jedrick Wills, that's just way more valuable than any of those wide receivers. And John, as I'm sure you know very well, this particular draft is loaded with talented wide receivers. So you can get guys in the second, third, fourth, or even, as Eric DeCosta, the GM of the Ravens, said, even the fifth round, you can get receivers that can make an immediate impact. So for me, easiest decision, if Jedrick Wills is on the board, or really if any of those four guys are on the board, that should be the pick for the Jets.
Scott, good stuff, my friend. Thank you very much, and stay safe.
Thanks, John. You too, buddy.
We thank Scott Mason for his selection for the Jets. Now we head back out to the West Coast. We welcome in Vic Tafur, who covers the Las Vegas now Raiders for The Athletic. Vic, obviously a big move here for the Raiders this year. It's kind of a new start for the organization and the franchise, but John Gruden's there for year number 2. So where do you think the Raiders are from a big picture perspective in the second year of the Mayock-Gruden regime?
I think they made some decent moves in free agency. They added the 2 starting linebackers, Corey Littleton and Nick Kwiatkowski. So I think now the main needs are at cornerback and at wide receiver.
When you evaluate those needs, are there any other positions that you think get in the mix to compete with those 2 spots here?
I don't think so. They could probably also use a defensive tackle, but I think at this point in the draft, there's some really good receivers on the board. I think the cornerback, I think C.J. Henderson's a possibility. So I think there's some good guys you can probably plug in right away at those 2 spots. Any
consideration of a trade up or a trade down here, do you think, for Oakland?
I think they might trade a couple spots up if one of those 4, I think there's 4 impact defensive players in this draft, but I think they're all gone, you told me. So I think they won't trade up. I could definitely see a trade down. I think the thing there would be that if they think the top 5 or 6 receivers are all kind of closely graded together, it makes sense to trade down and try to get back into the second-round pick also. But I think at this point, we'll just kind of take the pick and see where it goes.
All right, so let's do it, Vic. The Raiders at number 12 overall in the 2020 NFL Draft. Who do you got?
We're going to take Jerry Jeudy. I think he's it's very tight. I think those top 3 receivers, each one has different strengths, which will really make an impact. But I like Jerry Jeudy's route running. I wrote a story today kind of comparing him to Antonio Brown, a lot of his playmaking ability. So I think he's a nice fit for that offense.
All right, Vic, we're going to talk to you again at 19. I know you mentioned cornerback. How did you separate Jeudy? How close is it in your eyes, and then you think in the organization's eyes, between Jeudy, Lamb, and Ruggs, or maybe even a Jefferson out of LSU?
I think it's pretty close. I think the one reason why I think it's close is because Gruden, a couple times in the last year, said he wants a Tyreek Hill type, which I think you look at this draft, the one guy who clearly has that upside and the raw, explosive speed and game-breaking ability is Ruggs. So I think Ruggs will definitely be in play there. Lamb is the best as far as the high-pointing catches and yards after the catch, more of a bigger physical receiver. But I just think that in terms of the spot for a Z receiver in this draft, a guy who can kind of take all the plays that they kind of threw out last year when Brown combusted. I think Jeudy makes a lot of sense.
Vic, great stuff. We'll talk to you at pick number 19. Thank you so much.
All right, take care.
We thank Vic Tafer from The Athletic for giving us his pick for the Raiders at number 12, Jerry Jeudy. And we go to one of his colleagues from The Athletic, Matt Barrows, who covers the San Francisco 49ers. Matt, obviously, it's odd to have a team that went to the Super Bowl the previous year picking at 13. The Niners do it because they traded DeForest Buckner to the Colts for their first-round pick. So what's the general thinking for the 49ers heading into this 2020 draft, given the success that they had last year?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's about replacing two of the key figures that they lost last month, Buckner being one of them, and then Emmanuel Sanders, the wide receiver, being the other. And I see from the players who have been taken in your draft that Javon Kinlaw, that's the guy I probably would have taken had he been available from South Carolina, and then Derek Brown from Auburn are both off the board, so that would leave me with a receiver, I think.
How about cornerback? I know they had some issues last year across from Richard Sherman.
They have, and that's a very interesting position because Sherman is entering the final year of his contract. Akella Witherspoon is entering the final year of his contract. So they've got bodies there this year. But next year, they might be thin. So if they're looking a year ahead, cornerback certainly would be a position of interest. C.J. Henderson from Florida is a guy that's been bandied about some. I feel like that's something that they might be able to do later in the draft, and it might be a priority next year. I mean, they might make that a priority in free agency to go find a really good veteran cornerback next March.
Despite the trade with Buckner to get the extra one, the 49ers don't have a lot of draft picks. So your thoughts here on just their draft capital in general, and whether or not you think a trade down is more likely at 13 or when they select with their own first-round pick, which we'll talk to you later in the first round at 31.
Yeah, it's I've been asking that question, and so have the fans, and I don't really know what the answer is. I think a lot of it depends on who's available there at number 13. I'm going to go with a receiver here, but it's so deep at that position that they could conclude that, hey, let's trade down into the 20s, and we'll get a receiver there, or we'll get our receiver at pick 31. Their original pick. So they may conclude that even if wide receiver is the is the top position there at 13, that they can afford to wait and take that later in the draft. Maybe they cash that in and get a couple of mid-round selections, and they get a guy there. That's definitely a possibility. But if they're picking at 13. I would go with CeeDee Lamb, the Oklahoma receiver there.
Were you disappointed to see Jerry Jeudy off the board? Would he have been your pick if the Raiders had gone in a different direction?
You know what? I think I still would have gone with CeeDee Lamb. I mean, that's becoming the 49ers' identity. They've got George Kittle. They've got a really good running game. They've got Deebo Samuel, who acted like a running back when he had the ball in his hands last year. They smashed through tacklers, and CeeDee Lamb would really kind of fit that persona really well. He was a hard guy to bring down. I know a lot of that has to do with maybe some subpar tackling in the Big 12 in recent years, but he was really good after the catch. I mean, he's a really tough guy, and I think he would both add an element that they don't have, which is sort of a big, tall wide receiver. Plus something that they already do have, which is sort of this might is right, break tackles type of offense, and I think he would suit that very well.
Tell you what, heck of a group of weapons. You have George Kittle, Deebo Samuel, and CeeDee Lamb. That is not a bad set of guys for Jimmy Garoppolo to throw to next year. Matt, we appreciate it. We'll talk to you at pick 31.
All right, sounds good. Thanks.
We thank Matt Barrows. He covers the San Francisco 49ers for The Athletic. Now we head all the way to the southeast portion of the United States. Covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers for the Pewter Report is John Ledyard. John, friend of the program, how are you, pal?
Hey, I'm doing great, John. Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Great. I'm happy to hear you and all your folks in your circle are doing well. Everybody's safe and healthy. Let's talk about the Bucs here. Obviously, I'm not sure if you heard, but Tom Brady's now the quarterback for the Buccaneers. Kind of a big deal. So how does that change the approach here in the 2020 draft?
Yeah, I don't think they were going quarterback no matter what. They were about as clear about that as a team. Their Bucs are actually pretty clear as any team in the league probably about their intentions. I think are usually pretty straightforward about it. So I think when they said at the combine, they'll do their homework on these quarterbacks, and they're looking for maybe a developmental guy later in the draft. But they think they're in a win now window, and so getting Brady, I think it really takes quarterback off the table early in the draft. But I think more than anything, you're talking about Brady having, 2, maybe 3 years left, which is crazy to say at his age, but that's probably the window you're looking at for Tom Brady. So in that window, you want guys that can help you win and contribute now. So I think, trying to fill final holes in a roster, offensive tackle, right tackle specifically, could become more of a focal point so that they don't really have any starting, every starting position would kind of be sort of set at that point if they were to get a top right tackle in the class. But also, anything. I mean, if you're on the board and the top 4 tackles are off the board, and you're looking at everybody that's left, and you're thinking, oh man, we need to get a guy that's going to make a contribution now. I mean, I wouldn't rule out wide receiver, as crazy as it sounds, with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, though they don't really have a third receiver that's proven. And so getting one of these young receivers that's a stud early in the draft, could put that offense kind of over the top with Brady. So I think you're looking at some splash for the Bucs, and potentially the biggest thing that could be on the table is a trade up.
Well, that was going to be my next question. Since it's win now, you want to find an impact player. What would be the thoughts behind a potential trade up? Who would they be targeting? How far up would they want to go?
Yeah, that's the thing. The Bucs have actually never traded up in the first round under Jason Light. I think they've traded back twice, if I recall correctly. So it would be kind of uncharted territory for them in the first round under Light anyway, to be making a move like that. At the same time, this is a different roster. You have Tom Brady here. That changes things, like we said. So I think that kind of enables them to be like, okay, we need to be pretty proactive. Like, we've drafted a lot of players. We traded back from to get Vita Vea and picked up 2 second-rounders, and one of those guys is starting for us. We've added a ton of players in the draft. We moved back a bunch of times and added these picks, and we have this young core that we really like, and we don't have a ton of quote-unquote holes on the roster. And so let's go get the guy that's going to put us over the top in the first round. If we have to give up our third, and we have to give up one of our fourths, they have 2 fourths, and so when we do it, but I think that's kind of the situation they're in, because it's a little bit more win now. You don't want to hurt yourself, big time. But, I think you look at Jacksonville at 9 and you think that's tempting. Cleveland has a history of trading down. Analytics kind of based regime moving in there now. And that's a kind of a staple of analytics-based regime. So I think that could be an option too. And so I say all that to say that I think it's more likely for the Bucs this year than it ever is before. And if they do it, I can't imagine they would be making the move for anyone other than one of the top offensive tackles in the class, kind of whoever they fall in love with out of Mekhi Becton, Tristan Wirfs, Andrew Thomas, and Jedrick Wills.
Well, John, you have one of those guys left here, so you didn't have to move up to get him. Make your selection for the Bucs.
Yeah, I'm taking Mekhi Becton, the offensive tackle from Louisville. I actually just finished up his evaluation, and I just think I know there's some unknowns there, because I think PFF has him at 73 true pass sets this past season, and that's definitely way less than you'd like when you're taking a player this high. But those pass sets that he had look great. He moves unbelievably well for a guy that big. I just think even if his technique isn't perfect and doesn't become perfect at the NFL level, he's so big, so quick, and so powerful. I don't think a regular routine of moves is going to work for an NFL pass rusher. I think they're going to have to come up with different ways to beat him than they beat other guys, just because he has such unbelievable tools. I don't say that lightly about, NFL is a technique league. If you don't have great technique, you're probably not going to succeed. But Becton is one of those rare specimens that might be able to get away with it for a while he's perfecting all that stuff. And so I don't think he's going to hit the ground, and be an all-pro his rookie year. No offensive tackle really is. But I see the ceiling by year 3 to get to that level of a player. And he has experience playing the right and left sides too. So, he starts on the right side, opposite Donovan Smith, and then in a couple years, they want to move on from Donovan Smith. They didn't sign him to a long deal, so they want to move on from him. You can try Becton over on the left side if you want, or, depending on how the draft goes. It gives you flexibility at that point in time to be able to move things around in your lineup. So perfect mentality and type of player that they're trying to add in Tampa Bay to get nastier, more physical, and mean up front. So, yeah, that's a no-brainer for me. Given he's on the board, I'm taking Mekhi Becton.
Rapid-fire follow-up question, John. How do you have those tackles in your final evaluation ranked 1 through, let's say, 7, your top 7?
Yeah, I have Jedrick Wills first. Tristan Wirfs and Becton were like neck and neck. But I moved Wirfs ahead just because there's a little bit more in pass protection on tape to go with. But really comfortable with Becton, too. He's the third guy for me. And then Andrew Thomas fourth. I also really like his game. And Josh Jones would be fifth for me, the tackle from Houston, who could be consideration for the Bucs if the other 4 are off the board.
Have you gotten into like the Ezra Clevelands, Lucas Niangs, and those types of guys that maybe might go top of round 2?
Yeah, for sure. And I think Niang's an interesting situation because I think based on kind of what we've heard, what I've heard, and what I've seen other people report too, is that he could maybe be a day 3 guy because there's so much unknown over his hip. And his 2019 tape was rough as he was playing hurt, and that altered his pass set a lot. So I think you could see his best football out ahead of him. If you go back to 2018, he was pretty good. So he may be a steal on day 3. And I like Ezra Cleveland. I think he's a solid player. Some people really like Austin Jackson. I'm not a big fan of his, so I'll be lower on him than most others. But I think Ezra Cleveland and Isaiah Wilson are guys that'll probably go somewhere late first to early second, and they can help a team. They have some limitations, both of them, but I think they can help a team pretty early on and see the field pretty early on, even if they never become all-pro caliber players. So, yeah, it's a deep tackle class. There's a ton of talent, and a lot of teams are going to get better at a position where a lot of teams need to get better at across the NFL.
John, good stuff, my friend. We appreciate it. Stay safe. We'll talk to you down the road.
Absolutely. Thanks, John. I appreciate it.
We thank John Ledyard from the Pewter Report. Does a fantastic job. Now we head over to the AFC West. Nikki Jabvala covers the Denver Broncos for The Athletic. Nikki, thanks a lot for joining us today. Hope everybody in your circle is safe and sound.
Yes, thank you. They are, and happy to join.
Great. Thanks for being with us. So let's do a little state of the Broncos here in a nutshell. Vic Fangio, obviously, his second year there. John Elway has the Super Bowl. Last couple of years, though, probably not as good as he would have liked. So what's the general outlook from a franchise perspective with the Broncos in 2020 heading into the draft?
Yeah, I mean, they got a lot of work to do, and they've done a lot of work already. They've never had 3 consecutive losing seasons in, 46 years or something. So they sunk pretty low, but I think some of it was to be expected after Peyton Manning retired. Maybe not the, cycling through 7 different starting quarterbacks part, but they feel like they've kind of bounced off from the bottom, so to speak. And, with Drew Lock, they've really started to build around him, built up the offensive line, given him more weapons in the passing game and the run game, and, while adding, some veteran pieces to the defense with trades for A.J. Bouye and Terrell Casey. So they feel like they're in pretty good standing, but they still have, some holes to fill through the draft. I would say number 1 is probably receiver, and then offensive line and a cornerback. So far they've had a good offseason on paper, and, it's pretty paramount that they continue that in the draft.
They took an old-school approach with Drew Lock. They didn't make him play right away. They let him watch. And then, at least from the outside looking in, I thought there were some encouraging signs when he did have a chance to play towards the end of the year. So, Nikki, give me a feel for inside the organization. How bullish are they right now on what they saw from Lock in his rookie season?
I think they're optimistic. I mean, he had to sit out 10 weeks because of a thumb injury last year, but I think the way he closed the season with his 4-1 record, I think gave him plenty of reason to be optimistic. I think it's cautious optimism at this point just because of what they've experienced with 6 other starting quarterbacks, over the last 4 or 5 years. So they're hopeful. They want to make sure they give them enough to be successful. I think they've learned a lot over the last 4 years on what, they need to build up that offense. So I think they're very optimistic that he can be that guy, that he can be their quarterback for now and for years to come. But they got to continue to build around him and, help him be successful.
You already mentioned their needs. Any thought here or consideration for the Broncos to either trade up or back, depending on who's sitting there?
The only reason I could see him trading up is if there was, one of those top 4 tackles that they really, really had their heart set on, be it Wirfs or Jedrick Wills or Andrew Thomas. Mekhi Becton. I mean, those are the ones I could see them trading up for. To me, it doesn't, not to say they wouldn't do it, but it doesn't really make sense to trade up for a receiver, especially in this class with it being so deep. I could see them trading back. I mean, John did that last year when they traded down from 10 to 20 and ended up with Noah Fant there. Ability if they feel like the value is there and they could get more picks and still get, a quality player they want in the first round. I kind of think they should hold steady at 15. I mean, circumstances can change drastically between now and the draft, but, I think they're in prime position to get, a really good player and fill a big need.
Well, they in our mock, they just missed out on those top 4 offensive tackles, but a couple of good wide receivers are still on the board, Nikki, so make your pick. Who do you think the Broncos will select at number 15 in the 2020 draft based on who's left on the board?
I think based who's left, I think they got to go with Henry Ruggs. My top receiver is Jerry Jeudy. I just think he's so polished, his route running, the way he's able to create separation, but his teammate at Alabama has speed that, is just so rare. And I think his speed would be a nice complement with the size of Cortland Sutton and Noah Fant. And I think it would really boost their passing game. I mean, they need depth there at receiver, but they also need somebody who can contribute immediately. And he appears to be a player who can do just that. He's a playmaker. So, and it could be the closest they come to having any sort of answer to the Chiefs' Tyreek Hill. So, we're going with Ruggs at 15.
Awesome. Nikki, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Stay safe out there.
Likewise. Thank you.
We thank Nikki for joining us. Does a great job covering the Denver Broncos for The Athletic. Now let's head down to the southeastern United States, down to Atlanta, Georgia. To D'Orlando Ledbetter, he covers the Falcons for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. D'Orlando, appreciate you being with us, man. Thank you very much. Big picture, Falcons, where do they stand right now? Are they a team that still thinks with a couple of right additions that they can contend for a Super Bowl?
Yeah, I think so, John. They definitely got the running back. They need some help on the defensive side of the ball. Let a lot of people go during free agency, and they finished with 6-2 last season, and they think they can carry that over into the next season with a little bit better health. Who knows? Maybe they can return to the playoffs.
Where do you think the biggest needs are on this roster right now?
Well, at cornerback, they let the Desmond Trufant go in free agency, and they have to replace him. The defensive line has been looking for a pass rush for a long time now. They did pick up Dante Pollard Jr. in the free agency period, but they can always add some help along that line up front and getting after the quarterback, especially with Tom Brady coming to the division.
All right, so do me a favor, D'Orlando, make the selection. Who do you think, given our circumstances and the picks that have gone off the board so far, who the Falcons are going to pick at number 16 overall in the 2020 NFL Draft?
They're going to select Florida cornerback C.J. Henderson. He'll be a guy that can go in and take over a left cornerback. He's played man and zone defense in college. Played in some pro-style defenses under David Grantham. He'll step right in and help them out. Thomas Dimitroff said the Falcons and anybody in the league right now can never have too many cornerbacks.
Was he the guy you were hoping was going to be there that you were targeting?
Yes, he was. I'm expecting Javon Kinlaw to be gone and thinking Henderson would be there for them to take.
All right, and finally, quickly, any thoughts to either trading up or trading back for the Falcons? You think this is a draft where they stay put?
No, if Henderson's there, they stay put. Well, Thomas Dimitroff always trades up, so if they think their guy is going to go, they'll definitely go up to maybe 9 in Jacksonville. They know David Caldwell from his time here in Atlanta. They'll go up and get their guy. That's been his motto. He never trades back. He always goes up.
D, great stuff, my friend. Thank you for being with us. Stay safe down there. We'll talk to you down the road.
Sure, no problem. Take care. Bye now.
And now we turn our attention to a fellow team in the NFC East. We will go a little bit longer on this one because they are a rival of the New York Football Giants. We thank D'Orlando Ledbetter from the Atlanta Falcons who took C.J. Henderson, which I imagine might make David Hellman from DallasCowboys.com a little bit annoyed.
Yeah, well, a little bit annoyed because I do think, all things being equal, I think C.J. Henderson the Cowboys' pipe dream of a first-round pick. But I'm also a little bit relieved because I'm looking at the options that have been taken off the board in front of me, and it makes my job pretty easy. And if it falls this way for the Cowboys on draft night, I think it'll make their jobs pretty easy as well.
By the way, you can find David Hellman on DallasCowboys.com, also one of the hosts of their draft show, which, by the way, is a great podcast. Even if you're not a Cowboys fan, they do a real good job covering the draft. Make sure you go check it out. Dave, besides Henderson, who else are the Cowboys sitting here kind of, crossing their fingers, hoping might drop to them at 17 where they get some real good value for him?
I think you look at, and I know everybody talks about, you take the best player regardless of need, but I've always felt that that's a little bit of a lie. If the best player available at 17 was a running back, there's absolutely no way the Cowboys are going to draft him,
right.
With Ezekiel Elliott and Toni Pollard already on the roster. That doesn't make sense. So you look at the areas of need and where it lines up with pick 17. Cornerback is a big one. We know they like C.J. Henderson. They've talked to Christian Fulton out of LSU. They've had an eye on Jeff Gladney out of TCU. But then, for me, the other one is obviously pass rusher. Robert Quinn left in free agency. He went to Chicago on a gigantic contract. The Cowboys signed Aldon Smith, but the guy hasn't played since 2015. Same thing kind of goes for Randy Gregory. Neither one of those guys has officially been reinstated by the league from suspension. So if you're counting on that, I think you're kind of crazy, and that's why I keep circling back to K'Lavon Chaisson. He's a right end hybrid rush linebacker, defensive end out of LSU. Super athletic, super talented, got a lot of upside. He's only 20 years old. Doesn't have the on-field production that you probably would prefer from a top 20 pick, but again, a guy with that much upside, it's hard not to be intrigued.
Now, the Cowboys and Giants, Dave, are in similar situations. They carry over the front office. Obviously, the Joneses are always going to be making the calls there. The Giants still have Dave Gettleman, but a new coaching staff. And I know from our perspective, we really don't know for sure exactly what Patrick Graham's defense is going to look like. So you guys are trying to talk about prospects for Cowboys defense. Do you even know what Mike Nolan's trying to do with the front and how he wants to play?
Yeah, I mean, that is the dominant storyline around Dallas right now, is trying to figure out just what that might look like. I mean, a great example is, defensive tackle has been a need for the Cowboys for years, and a lot of people talk about Javon Kinlaw because of that. But with Mike McCarthy and Mike Nolan in the building, they go out and sign not just Gerald McCoy, but Dontari Poe as well, who, he played a lot in a four-man front for Carolina last year, but he really made his name playing as a 3-4 defensive tackle. And Stephen Jones actually went on the radio in Dallas on Tuesday afternoon and was talking about how they would have never shown an interest in a player like that when Rod Marinelli was their defensive coordinator. So I think you're jumping to conclusions thinking that Mike Nolan is going to turn this into a 3-4 defense, but I do think they want to be much more versatile, much more multiple, and it's going to look a lot different. And it's definitely a challenge for us that cover the team because you've got to consider all different types of players. And then, there's the years-old joke about the Cowboys not valuing the safety position. Is that something that could change under Mike Nolan, or is that more of a front office philosophy? Should the Cowboys be talking about Xavier McKinney and Grant Delpit at pick 17? If this was last year, I would have said no chance in hell. There's no way Rod Marinelli and Jason Garrett are going to draft the safety in the top 20. But I don't think you can rule it out when you're talking about this new staff.
That's interesting. So your thoughts here, do you think a trade-up is possible? The Cowboys are going to have a bunch of compensatory picks in next year's draft. So would they be willing maybe to dip in to their 2021 draft capital to maybe move up here to get a guy like Henderson if they really value him that much at corner?
I think it would have to be something kind of crazy. I don't know if they do that for C.J. Henderson. Do they do it for Jeffrey Okudah if for some crazy reason he falls a little bit and he's still there, around pick 9 or 10? Maybe. Derek Brown's another one. As soon as I saw his bad 3-cone time at the Combine, I thought, ooh, if this guy kind of falls down toward 10 or 12, maybe the Cowboys are interested in making a move. But no, I'd be surprised. They haven't done a ton of trading up over the last 5 or 6 years, and I'm not convinced there's a prospect that's such a slam dunk that they should be doing that. If anything, I think a lot of people in the Cowboys media and fan base would prefer for them to trade back, maybe, if somebody like New England or New Orleans wants to come up for a guy like Jordan Love right around there at pick 17, maybe you could add a pick or two, and you'll still have plenty of options you like in the mid-20s. I think that sounds more plausible than jumping up because, like I said, I'm not convinced there's a prospect out there that they're going to be so smitten with that they feel like they have to do it.
Yeah, I got to imagine that becomes more likely, right? If both Chason and Henderson are gone and maybe the best player left is a Kinlaw, then a trade down probably becomes more likely, right?
Yeah, even with the change in coaching staff, I would have to see the Cowboys spend a top 20 pick on a defensive tackle to believe that they would do it. I don't think that they think there's enough bang for their buck. So yeah, I mean, Henderson and Chason, I view as that's the best case scenario. If one of those guys are there, or if both of them are somehow there, that's your absolute best case scenario. If that's gone, and I know in the scenario we're dealing with, all three of the big receivers are gone as well. I think if one of those three of Judy, Ruggs, or CeeDee Lamb was still sitting there, I think they'd at least have to talk about it. They don't have a slot receiver right now. They really only have the duo of Amari Cooper and Michael Gallup. So they do need to do something about the receiver position. I don't think they want to, which, again, that's what makes this scenario so easy for me is that they're kind of wiped out everywhere except for the one big need, which is pass rusher, which is why, if I'm making the call, I would run to the podium to draft K'Lavon Chaisson.
I've heard some people whisper center here because of Travis Frederick announcing his retirement, but to me that seems a little bit rich at 17, no?
Yeah, that just feels like an overreaction to me. The Cowboys made the playoffs 2 years ago with Joe Looney starting at center when Travis was sick with Guillain-Barré syndrome. Looney's still on the roster. They just drafted Connor McGovern in the top 100 last year. They drafted him as a guard, but he did start a whole season at center. So they've got options. And again, 17 feels awfully rich for a center unless it's a generational prospect. I know Peter King reported that they're high on Cesar Ruiz out of Michigan. And again, if they were to trade back later in the first round with somebody, maybe that's more plausible. I would be pretty surprised to see him do that at 17.
Dave, awesome stuff, my friend. Let's make it official. Cowboys, 17th overall pick in the 2020 draft. Who you got?
Going to go with K'Lavon Chaisson out of LSU and try to fix this Cowboys pass rush.
Good stuff, Dave. We really appreciate it, my friend. Let's talk again down the road. Best of luck to you. Stay safe.
Anytime, man. Y'all too. Stay safe. Thanks.
We thank David Hellman from DallasCowboys.com for joining us. They select K'Lavon Chaisson. Now, let's go. We welcome back Armando Salguero, who covers the Dolphins for the Miami Herald. We already talked to him when they selected Tua earlier on in this draft. Armando, Dolphins are up for their second of 3 first-round picks. What are your thoughts here in terms of how this draft has gone leading up to this selection? Who maybe were you hoping might be there but are unfortunately off the board?
Yeah, my thoughts on this draft, as I was saying, is I hate this draft because I want really good tackles, and this draft shows that really good tackles go fast in these exercises, as they will, by the way, on April 23rd. So the Dolphins, they don't really have a guy that they could plug in at left tackle right now. Julian Davenport is on the roster, but, if you're going to expend a lot of resources on having your forever franchise quarterback at number 5, you better start figuring out a way to protect that guy. So that's where I'm at.
Okay, well, would you think there be a consideration, and how much would what they do with the first pick obviously impact it, where if they have to move up a few spots to try to grab one of those tackles, that they would use some of your excess draft capital to go get somebody? Or if everything's liquidated, would they maybe think about moving down if they had used some of their draft capital to move up for Tua?
Both. So in this draft, obviously, the Dolphins are sitting at 18, but as you noted, they have excess draft capital. And I would think that because that includes 2 second-round picks, they've got, 5 picks in the top 70, they would be willing to move up to try to get to one of those top 3 or 4 offensive tackles. Having said that, we're not able to do that. And if on draft day they're sitting there and the top 3 or 4 offensive tackles are gone at 18, I would think that they would think about going in the other direction. And because, frankly, a guy like Josh Jones from Houston, or even the USC kid, Austin Jackson, I think they're going to be good players in the NFL. I really do. But if you're picking them at 18, you might be overdrafting them a little bit.
Yep.
And so, it's about value as well as getting good players. And the value for those players at that spot, it's arguable.
Well, Armando, I feel like you're the first person I've really put into a real tough spot. Jordan Rodriguez was very upset that Isaiah Simmons wasn't there for the Panthers, and now you're kind of in a tough spot here. So make your selection. Who are you picking with the 18th overall selection in the 2020 Giants Huddle mock draft?
Right. So, again, I probably would want to trade down. I don't want to pick a running back this early, although the Dolphins need a running back. I definitely need a left tackle, and I'm going with Austin Jackson of USC. I know that he's probably a late first-round guy, but it is what it is, man. It's not a perfect science, and I'm going to get him coached up with my awesome coaching staff, and he is going to be a stud.
Sounds great. Armando, good stuff. We will talk to you at selection number 26 that you acquired from the Houston Texans for Laramie Tunsil. We appreciate it, my friend. Stay safe.
My pleasure. Thank you.
That was Armando Salguero, covers the Dolphins for the Miami Herald. Again, we'll hear from him again at pick number 26 in our 2020 Giants Huddle Reporter mock draft. And now we welcome back in Vic Tafur. He covers the Oakland Raiders for The Athletic. Vic, based on the guys I've sent you that have gone off the board, anyone in that group that you're kind of sitting there targeting, hoping might be there for the Raiders when they come around for their second pick at number 19?
Well, I was probably praying for C.J. Henderson, but I figured it was a long shot. I thought he's definitely got some buzz. And he's a really good press man corner, so that was the one guy I was looking at. I'd probably want to trade down if I could right there at this point, but I'm not sure we can do that, so I'm ready to brave forward.
Yeah, when we talked at pick number 12, you selected Jerry Jeudy, the wide receiver. Cornerback was your other need. Now that you see kind of what's happened since that 12th pick, do you think going Jeudy was the right decision?
Yeah, I still do. I think, in hindsight, I could have gone Henderson 12 and a receiver at 19, but I definitely think Judy's probably the best guy as far as immediate fit for the Raiders, so I'm happy with that, and I think there's a guy we'll like it at 19.
Well, let's talk about it. Who are the guys that you're thinking about right here at number 19 for the Raiders based on who's left?
Well, if I can't trade down, I'm probably going to go with last year we had a lot of success with Clemson, so I'll probably go with A.J. Terrell, the cornerback out of Clemson.
Who else was in the mix for you if you decided not to go with Terrell?
Jalen Johnson's interesting, but I think his history of shoulder problems to me is the concern. So I'd love to trade down if I could. The D tackles, I'm not really crazy about this spot. I think it's kind of a bad little spot for the draft for first guys who can come in and have an immediate impact.
Well, Vic, Armando Salguero, who was our last guest from the Miami Herald, he wanted to trade down from 18, and he ended up taking Austin Jackson. He thought it was a little bit of a reach. So this is always where it starts getting tough. We appreciate the time, my friend. Stay safe out there, and we'll talk to you down the road.
Okay, take care.
We thank Vic Tafur for joining us from The Athletic, covering the Raiders. They take A.J. Terrell, and now we go back to someone we heard from earlier in our mock draft. That is Mike DeRocco. He covers the Jacksonville Jaguars for ESPN. And second pick of the first round for Jacksonville, Mike. What are your thoughts here about how the first 19 picks have gone? Is this about what you expected, or do you got some surprises in there for you?
No, pretty much went the way I expected. Kinlaw and Brown gone early, and then the quarterbacks are all gone, obviously. Not that I thought the Jags were looking quarterback in the first round, because they're not. But yeah, I didn't see too many surprises there. Two guys that I was hoping would have slipped a little further were Henderson and Ruggs, because I know the Jags really like both of those guys. Just leaves them in a spot here where, in reality, if they don't really like what's here, they probably would end up trading down or back out of the first, pick up some extra picks. But, we'll see how it goes there in real life next week. But, I'm ready to make my pick for the Jags.
Okay, well, Mike, before we get to the name, give me the guys that are kind of in the mix for you here that you were deciding between before you made your final decision.
Yeah, well, like I said, Henderson and Ruggs were there. The Jags need some help at defensive tackle, like we talked about before. So Ross Blacklock was a guy that I considered as well. Christian Fulton, the cornerback at LSU, was I had a little bitty, couldn't read my writing down what I had written here on my notes. Christian Fulton, the cornerback out of LSU, and Trevon Diggs, the corner out of Alabama, were guys that I think would be the top three guys I would consider taking at this pick. This pick right now.
How do you go about separating those corners? Because I know, based on what I've read around the league, there's a lot of disagreement as to how teams have that next group of cornerbacks ranked.
Yeah, and it just kind of depends on sort of what you really, really like about a guy. Now, I know Diggs is a little bit bigger than Christian Fulton, but I think Christian Fulton is a little bit faster from what you understand. And it just kind of depends on really what you want. Both those guys seem to be pretty similar in terms of coverage ability, and I think Fulton has a little bit better ball skills, so I think that might be the way that you would kind of differentiate those guys. But it really, when you get guys that are kind of similar a little bit, it really just kind of goes down to what you like. When now you FaceTime video, FaceTiming or Zoom calls, what kind of feel you got from those guys, and your research in terms of what are you getting from that guy in the locker room? What kind of student of the game is he going to be? That kind of stuff. So, but all it takes is for one GM to really like a guy over the other guy, and it can be just as simple as that.
Mike, make your pick for the Jacksonville Jaguars at 20th overall in the 2020 Giants Huddle Mock Draft.
Yeah, trading A.J. Boye away to Denver left a huge hole for the Jaguars at corner, especially with Darqueze Dennard signing not working out. So I'm going to have them grab Christian Fulton, the corner out of LSU, with the number 20 pick, and then he plugs in right as the starter on the other side opposite Trey Herndon, and now the Jags, probably have fixed one of their two biggest weaknesses.
Mike, good stuff, my friend. We really appreciate you helping us out with the mock this year. You had 2 picks, double duty. We thank you for helping us. Stay safe down there, and we'll talk to you down the road. Enjoy the draft.
Thanks. Appreciate you having me.
We thank Mike DiRocco from ESPN covering the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now we head to the NFC East to a division rival, the Philadelphia Eagles, and who better than Dave Spadaro, who writes for the Eagles website. Dave, hope you guys are well and surviving this very, very strange time in America.
Yes, I am doing fine, thank you, and prayers and best wishes to everybody out there. Scary times. Let's all hope that we have a 2020 NFL season to enjoy.
Yeah, absolutely, and a big thank you to all those folks out there on the front lines, the healthcare workers, and everybody else, by the way, delivery guys, people that work in the grocery stores that allow everybody kind of still live their lives and, putting themselves at risk, or the MTA workers and all that sort of stuff. So,
no doubt.
Now let's get to the fun stuff. Any surprises or anyone maybe that you were hoping could drop to the Eagles here at their selection in the first round, number 21, that is not on the board?
Yeah, everybody in the fan base is certainly saying, "Oh, we need receivers." So I'm keeping my eyes open. Certainly, Ruggs was somebody that Eagles fans had hope would still be there at 21. So he's not there. Obviously, Judy and Lamb not going to happen. But I think had Ruggs slipped down, maybe the Eagles would certainly consider somebody with that kind of speed. We saw what happened to the Eagles offense when Deshaun Jackson was sent off the field with injuries. So, that was the player I think separated from the rest of the wide receivers. But he's off the board, so the Eagles don't have to force the issue if they don't want to.
So besides wide receiver, Dave, what other positions of need are you really looking at for the Eagles here in the 2020 draft?
Yeah, I really think that cornerback, even though they made the trade for Darius Slay, it is time to get long-term answers in place, frontline talent, and the Eagles have that opportunity at number 21 with Trevon Diggs from Alabama, still on the board. The things that he can do, the way that he can fit into this scheme, I think that would be a name that you just really wouldn't pass up if he's there at 21.
All right. Is that your official pick for the Eagles?
Yeah, and my explanation is this. And look, it very well could be a wide receiver, but there are enough wide receivers in this draft that you can come back and get one in round 2. The Eagles have 2 picks in the 4th round. Everything everybody is saying is that the depth at wide receiver is unprecedented for many years. So I'm making the pick of the very talented Diggs and shoring up cornerback for the next several seasons. Then you can come back and address linebacker. Then you can come back and address wide receiver. You don't have to do it in round 1. So, yes, Diggs is my pick for the Philadelphia Eagles at number 21 in the 1st round.
Now, does he stick out like a sore thumb for you at the cornerback position based on the other guys that are available? Is that a pretty easy choice among the guys that are left for you?
For me, it is based on his size, 6'2", rangy, plays really well in zone coverage, can press wide receivers, gives the Eagles the opportunity with Slay to match up again, and they're solid inside with Nickel Roby-Coleman, who comes over from the Rams in free agency.
Great signing, by the way, Dave. That was a great value signing, man. Whew.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think they can really, really add to what they gave up the most X plays in the NFL last year. And when the Eagles played the Giants, you saw it, John. The Eagles could not control the downfield throw. And they've invested in the defensive line with Javon Hargrave. They've invested in the defensive backfield with Slay. And I think Diggs really completes this Eagles defense.
Now, was there any thought to either Kenneth Murray or Patrick Queen here, the number 2 and number 3 consensus linebackers still on the board after Isaiah Simmons?
Yeah, I mean, very much so. But it just would be so out of character for the Eagles to go linebacker round 1. You know, I don't remember the last time they did one. I think it was 1981, maybe.
Sounds
Jerry
like the
Robinson.
Giants. Sounds like the Giants with Carl Banks.
Yeah, from UCLA. But, I mean, it's a possibility, but I just think that, you know, the way the Eagles have invested up front, they really believe that the defense goes through the D-line, that you can have your linebackers run free, run clean, and you invest in the back end, you invest in the front end, and that's why I'm going Diggs. So, you know, I consider Justin Jefferson here, and I consider the linebackers here, but I just think you go best player on the board, and I think it's Diggs.
All right, final question, Dave, before we say goodbye, and this is a topic that we've talked a lot about on the shows that we're still doing on remote. Are the Eagles just really licking their chops here? I mean, they've got to be really happy about the fact that there's probably going to be no off-season program in person. And, you know, you'll have the virtual stuff, but it's not the same. And they're the only team in the division that's returning the same head coach and the same offense and the same defense.
Nobody's happy about this situation.
Well, of course.
Right? Certainly the Eagles on paper would have an advantage because they come back more intact. And, you know, with some extra, with everybody understanding the scheme for the most part. However, I will go back to this, and I've said this before with you. There has not been a repeat winner in the NFC East since 2003, 2004. It is a division where crazy things happen. 2020 will be no exception.
And as has been proven in many ways, 2020 is not shy about being crazy, Dave. It's not shy.
It's been unpleasant so far, and we hope it gets a lot better and everybody stays healthy and we can all enjoy a great football season together.
Absolutely. Best to you and your family and everybody in the Eagles organization, Dave. You guys are a real good group. We hope everybody's well, and we'll hopefully see you in person in not so long.
Yeah, and the schedule comes out in May. John, thanks to you and to everybody out there. The Giants, good people, good folks, love their jobs, love their lives, and let's all stay healthy.
We thank Dave Spadaro from the Eagles website for joining us. They select Trayvon Diggs, and I know our next team, the Minnesota Vikings, might have had some interest in a cornerback spot. They've had some fly the coop this offseason. To talk about it, Arif Hassan, he covers the Vikings for The Athletic. Arif, you got John Schmeelk here in New Jersey. Hope everybody in your world is safe in these really strange times.
Yeah, I hope everyone in your world is safe as well.
They are. Thank you very much. All right, before we get to the actual pick, let's kind of focus in on what you think the biggest needs are for the Minnesota Vikings right now, heading into 2020, still obviously trying to be contenders in the NFC.
Yeah, for sure. Well, this is a bit of a rough draft scenario for them because they need new starters at cornerback, multiple new starters at cornerback. They will also need, some receivers. They traded Stephon Diggs away for the pick that we're using to select right now, and then also, like every year, the Vikings do need offensive linemen, and they could stand to make a couple of picks on the defensive line, both on the interior and the edge. So a lot of options for them.
Considering they have a lot of needs, no Everson Griffin, you lost all the cornerbacks, Xavier Rhodes, Trey Waynes, Mackenzie Alexander, Everson Griffin's out the door too, and they traded Stephon Diggs. Any thoughts of perhaps trading down for the Vikings to try to create a little bit more volume of picks from one of these two slots?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that in this particular draft scenario that has played out, ideally they would trade down, grab some more picks. You're right; they've got a couple of needs. I think that they would want to take a couple of shots in the second round just so that they can really kind of fill out that roster, like you said.
All right, so give me your pick, and then I'll follow up with a quick question. Who is your selection, Arif, for the Minnesota Vikings at selection number 22 in the Giants Huddle 2020 mock draft?
Yeah, well, with the 22nd overall pick, the Vikings select Jalen Johnson, Utah cornerback. I think we're a little bit worried about the run on cornerbacks here, and the number of physical cornerbacks that can play Zimmer style of football is running a little bit thin. So we grab a corner that is an average to above average athlete that's got some technique to clean up, but some pretty remarkable instincts, trusts his eyes a lot, and does a lot of tape study. So this sounds like a Zimmer cornerback. He's got the appropriate length to compete on the outside and the inside. Seems like somebody that they would covet.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a real nice fit for the way the Vikings want to play defense. Any consideration to Justin Jefferson here, who is probably, at least according to most experts, probably the best receiver left on the board?
Honestly, that's who I was going to pick before I got scared off by that cornerback group. So, I really do like Justin Jefferson. He would have been my pick, but even if he goes off the board, I think the Vikings can be pretty happy with the receivers that are going to be left when they get to pick again at 25. So that's a big part of it too, is that they get a double dip in the first round. So they'll take the scarcer position at 22. I think. Was
Johnson the easy pick for you based on the other cornerbacks left remaining?
Not as easy. I do like Jeff Gladney a lot, but I think the physical profile, the size. That helps a little bit more when it comes to somebody like Johnson.
Arif, we'll talk to you in a couple picks. We appreciate it, my friend.
All right, looking forward to it.
We thank Arif Hassan, who covers the Vikings for The Athletic. So we head on to pick number 23, the New England Patriots, who welcome in Mike Reese, who covers them for ESPN. Mike, we appreciate you being with us. Boy, new world for the Patriots. Tom Brady has moved on. So what's the general thoughts here as the Patriots embark upon a new era, though Bill Belichick's still the man in charge?
Well, I think there's a couple different thoughts. The first is one of appreciation for everything that Tom Brady brought the Patriots over the years, and then one of a new beginning, because the question here is, will the Patriots invest in the quarterback position? And if they do, how high will they do it? So you have those two factors in addition to the "in Bill we trust" saying. People say with Bill Belichick running the football operation for his 21st year, they have confidence that he'll position the team one way or the other for sustained success.
So is there a thought of a potential trade-up this year, Mike, to go get that quarterback? Or is that a little bit too big of a jump here, picking at 23?
Well, look, what I would say is Bill Belichick has made 77 draft day trades in his 20 years with the Patriots. And if I've learned anything over that time, it's nothing should surprise us one way or the other. All it takes is for him to fall in love with one guy, and I think we all subscribe to the theory that if there's a quarterback that you feel is the answer, there's really no price that you can pay.
That's correct.
That's too rich to go ahead and do it.
100%. All right, Mike, give me your selection here. Who do the Patriots select at pick number 23 overall in the 2020 Giants Huddle mock draft?
Well, the way I have the Patriots' needs sort of listed, it's the quarterback's in a separate category in the standpoint of if you fall in love with a guy, that trumps everything. Then I have tight end, and at this point, I felt like a little rich maybe to go with a tight end, so I went to my number 2 need, and I really liked what I saw with Kenneth Murray, the Oklahoma linebacker, available for the Patriots. That's my number 2 need, and here's a guy that might be able to play on all 4 downs, possibly be a starter alongside Dante Hightower, a nice contrast in playing style between the two of them. And one thing I've learned on the scouting trail is that if you're going to take a linebacker in the first round, you want to make sure he factors in to first down, second down, third down, and even on special teams, and Murray would do that.
All right, the final follow-up before we say goodbye, Mike, what other players were in consideration for you besides Murray?
Well, the tight end spot that I mentioned, I'm thinking to myself, is that too rich for someone like Cole Kmet of Notre Dame, And it's hard to know because this isn't a deep tight end class, and if you really need one and you really think he's head and shoulders above the rest, well, maybe that isn't too rich to take him there. So I was batting that around a little bit, and then the offensive line can never go wrong there. One of the tackles I off the board, but still, I don't think that's a bad spot to look tackle there because as we saw with the Patriots last year when they had a run of injuries and retirements on the offensive line, those needs are really tough to fill on the fly, so you can never go wrong developing a prospect up front with a top pick.
Mike, we appreciate the time. Stay safe, my friend.
All right, you as well. Thanks for having me.
We say thank you to Mike Reese, who covers the Patriots for ESPN, and we head down to Nolens, where Larry Holder covers the Saints for The Athletic. Larry, thanks for being with us. The Saints still trying to find that second Super Bowl for Drew Brees. They love to wheel and deal. So let's start there. Thoughts on a potential trade up or down for the Saints this year at number 24?
Yeah, the Saints are always looking to wheel and deal. Whether or not they even have enough draft assets to do it, they still make it happen, borrowing picks from another year. So, I feel like the Saints, though, in this draft, maybe they would be more apt to actually move down, which would be a rarity for them, given they don't have a second-round pick. But we've also seen in the past where even if they don't have that, they might pull the trigger and go maybe get one of those top receivers in the draft. They did it in 2014 when they moved up to go get Brandon Cooks in what was supposed to be a heavily laden wide receiver draft. And so, I wouldn't put that out of the total question for the Saints, but I do still feel like 24, that they can get a pick that can definitely help them right away.
Where do you see the major needs right now for the Saints to put them over the top?
Yeah, I just alluded to wide receiver. I do feel like they could use a young wide receiver, even though they added Emmanuel Sanders this offseason to join up with Michael Thomas. But I would definitely also look at linebacker. A.J. Klein left to free agency to go to Buffalo. Alex Anzalone and Kiko Alonso have both been injury-laden, and the only real linebacker they have that we know can regularly stay healthy is DeMario Davis. So I do feel like that the Saints have not really addressed that in free agency either. So I think linebacker. Also, interior offensive line. That's kind of a sneaky part for the Saints to possibly look at with Larry Warford going into the final year of his contract.
Well, then I imagine, Larry, this lines up pretty well because Justin Jefferson is still hanging around at 24 and Patrick Queen hanging around at 24. Who's your pick for the Saints at 24th overall in the 2020 Giants Huddle Mock Draft?
That's the debate, and it hits really close to home since LSU is just right down the road. So the Saints are certainly familiar with both Patrick Queen and Justin Jefferson. The fact that Queen is on the board, though, I'm going to go linebacker and take Patrick Queen. Middle linebacker, they could certainly use a middle linebacker within this group. And wide receiver, because of the depth of the draft and the lack of total need by adding Sanders in the offseason and free agency, doesn't mean they have to take a wide receiver right now. But Patrick Queen falls right into their lap, and the Saints will take him, and I think he would jump in immediately, and you try to push him to be your starter middle linebacker week one of the season.
Tremendous stuff, Larry. Hope you and your family, everybody stay safe, and we'll talk to you down the road. I appreciate the time.
You got it. Thanks for having me.
We thank Larry Holder from The Athletic. We go to his colleague back up in Minnesota. We heard from him just a couple picks ago. We welcome back in Arif Hassan. Arif, we talked about either a corner or receiver at your last pick. Two linebackers in Kenneth Murray and Patrick Queen. Since you made that selection, you went cornerback before. Is this an easy one to look at the top wide receiver on the board right here?
Yeah, absolutely. We were a little bit worried that receiver might be gone, but we really like the talent at the position. It's still important to try and grab as much talent as you can at one of the most important positions in the NFL. So with the 25th pick, the Vikings will select wide receiver Justin Jefferson, who is a really good route runner. Doesn't have elite athletic traits, but above average in almost every category, especially when it comes to quickness. Obviously, you're going to have to worry about whether or not he'll be able to perform in press, whether or not he'll be able to perform outside of that really excellent offense that LSU had. But he should be a great compliment to Adam Thielen.
Any thoughts to maybe picking one of the bigger outside receivers here rather than someone like Jefferson, who operated almost primarily out of the slot in college, whether it's a Denzel Mims or a Michael Pittman or a T. Higgins or a Brandon Ayuk, somebody like that?
Yeah, no, certainly. That certainly crossed my mind, and having kind of a big play, big catch receiver like one of those guys that you mentioned, I think would help a lot, especially in the red zone. But it turns out Adam Thielen is really great at those situations, despite only being about 6 feet tall. He plays a lot like a 6'4" big contested catch receiver when it comes to the red zone. And I kind of want to replicate some of the things that offense did with Stephon Diggs in there. I think Jefferson comes the closest. That way you can do all the same stuff that was working for the offense pretty well, and you can kind of expand in terms of just making sure that Jefferson's skill sets translate to the NFL. So I certainly think that that's a good idea with how many good big bodies there are. I think you can also find that type a little bit later in the draft. I wouldn't be surprised if the Vikings double-dipped.
Any thought at a pass rusher at this spot? Anyone worth the bang for the buck in your opinion?
Yeah, no, there's a couple of pass rushers. You take a look at the Penn State kid, Gross-Matos. You take a look at the Iowa kid, pretty close to where the Vikings are. And the biggest problem in this draft is that the talent at edge rusher does drop off the later you go, but the Vikings don't really pick edge rushers in the first 2 rounds. They get their Everson Griffins in the 4th round or Daniil Hunter in the 3rd round, and they've been doing it again and again. They haven't picked one since 2005. So
wow.
I think, and they've always been able to produce really excellent pass rush. So I think you trust what that excellent defensive line coach staff can do for you. Grab somebody in the 3rd, 4th round that meets kind of their athletic thresholds, and hope it works out because they've earned the trust.
Arif, great stuff, my friend. Stay safe, and we appreciate your time taking 2 selections for us in this year's mock draft.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
We thank Arif Hassan for making that 2nd pick for the Minnesota Vikings in the last 4. Now we'll head over to another familiar face, the man that's making his 3rd pick in this year's 2020 Giants Huddle mock draft, Armando Salguero. He covers the Miami Dolphins for the Miami Herald, and he's selecting a pick number 26. Armando, are you surprised at all about who's gone off the board since we last spoke?
I'm not surprised, but to be honest with you, John, I'm going to go in a different direction, so it doesn't matter what has happened. Because I've got a strategy. I'm going to do I've got a strategy play.
Okay, well, talk to me about your strategy.
All right, so obviously early on, I picked a quarterback. And then I picked a left tackle that I hope can start. I would have loved to have gotten Andrew Thomas, but dang it, he was gone.
It happens.
And so I went with the next best player available at tackle, and I believe that was Jackson, correct?
Yep.
From USC. All right, well, I still have that quarterback that I want to protect, and I'm going to go back to the offensive line because here's the thing. The Miami Dolphins have had a search going on for a franchise quarterback since Dan Marino retired after 1999. So that's a long time.
Yes.
That's 20 years. Guess what? One of the reasons they haven't been able to identify a good quarterback and actually have him produce is they haven't really had a good offensive line in a long time either. And I think it's time. So I'm going back to the offensive line again with my 3rd pick in the 1st round.
All right, make the pick, and then we'll talk about it. Who do you got, Armando?
All right, so I am going to take, unless I am wrong, Josh Jones is still available, correct?
Yes, he is, sir. And I know he was one of the 2 guys you were considering with your last pick.
Correct. And so I'm taking Josh Jones with my 28th overall pick? 26th overall pick. And I was thinking of doing the center position instead with the Michigan kid, Cesar Ruiz.
Yep.
Especially because as the general manager of the Miami Dolphins, I like to make my owner happy, and Stephen Ross is a big-time Michigan guy. but and I like my job, but I think I'm, the tackle is the better value at this stage, so that's what I'm doing.
Any thought to a running back? I believe you mentioned that thought to me in one of your prior selections as well.
Sure. Yeah. No. There are some outstanding running backs still available, and I've got 2 second-round picks.
That sounds about perfect, doesn't it?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Armando, great stuff, my friend. We really appreciate you making 3 picks for us this year. Hopefully the Dolphins will make some good ones for your sake. And, the AFC East, it's a whole new world. Who knows what's going to happen?
Yeah, well, all I can tell you is next year, the Dolphins have 2 first-round picks again.
Nothing wrong with that, my friend. Thank you, Armando.
All right, John.
We thank Armando Salguero from the Miami Herald for making the Dolphins' 3rd first-round pick in our mock draft. And now we turn our attention back to the West Coast, to the Seattle Seahawks, to Bob Condata, who covers them for the Seattle Times. Bob, thanks for being with us, first of all. And the Seahawks are the kings of unpredictability here, so I'm putting you in a really tough spot to try to actually predict what they're going to do.
Yeah, although they have a really, really obvious need this year. So, you're seeing almost everybody sort of give them a defensive lineman, and particularly a defensive end, as somebody who can rush the passer, because that was their real big Achilles heel last year. They only had 28 sacks. Only the Miami Dolphins, I think, had fewer than that. So it was a real issue for them, and they said going into the offseason, improving that was going to be basically their number one goal. And they don't even look like they've done that really yet, because they haven't been able to re-sign Jadeveon Clowney and some other things. So, it looks for all the world out here like they're waiting to the draft to really try to address that.
What's your feel? Do you think they're still in the mix for Clowney? What do you think's going on there?
I think there's a chance, but obviously they didn't give him the kind of offer he was expecting. I think he really wanted a $20 million a year kind of offer, and I don't think they ever came anywhere close to that. And it's just sort of a difference of opinion over what a guy's worth, basically. And the Seahawks this is sort of how they've run the franchise the last 10 years since Pete Carroll and John Snyder have been there, and that's why you've seen some of their, they didn't budge on Richard Sherman or Earl Thomas or some of these other guys, who had really long tenures here. They sort of decide what they think a guy's value is and sort of stick to it, and that's what they've done here with Clowney. But, Clowney's not getting better offers from anybody else either. Otherwise, he'd be signed with somebody right now. So, I think there's still a chance that it works, that it kind of circles back and that he ends up with the Seahawks.
So, Bob, then this was not a great draft for defensive ends and pass rushers. The top 2 are off the board, which I'm sure you're not surprised by. Caleb Von Chason gone, obviously Chase Young gone. Who are the pass rushers that you think the Seahawks would be thinking about at this spot at 27?
Yeah, I think A.J. Epinesa of Iowa, I think would make a lot of sense. And then I think a guy that you're seeing a lot of people speculate as a Seattle target, Yetur Gross-Matos of Penn State. If I had to pick one of those 2, I'd probably go with Gross-Matos. He sort of just fits the profile a little bit more of being just a pure pass rusher, which is really what Seattle needs. They just kind of need some speed off the edge. They signed a couple of veteran guys who each have been with Seattle before, Bruce Irvin and Benson Mayowa, but neither of them necessarily project as being real long-term fixes at that at all. So they definitely need to add a young pass rusher. So I think he'd probably be the more logical of those 2.
All right, so let's make it official. Bob, who do you predict that the Seahawks will pick at 27th overall?
I'll go with. Yeah, Yetur Gross-Matos of Penn State. We'll just pencil him in, pen him, put him in ink there for the Seahawks there at number 27.
You think any chance of a trade down here for Seattle? You think they're going to stay put?
No, I think there's a great chance they trade down. They haven't used their original first-round pick since 2011, so it's sort of
that's why I asked.
Sort of always a thing. And they always, they've used first-round picks, but not their original one since 2011. Every year since then, they've traded their first-round pick in one way or another. And, for sure, it makes a lot of sense. They only have 7 draft picks at the moment, which would be the fewest. Last year
last year about this time they had 4 picks, and they ended up with 11 by the time the draft ended. So that's sort of John Snyder's MO, is to try to accumulate picks, especially in sort of those middle rounds. He likes to try to do that. Last year they did a lot of packaging of picks, ended up with some extra ones that they were able to trade up and go get DK Metcalf and the flexibility to go after players that they really like, especially in sort of those middle rounds.
Bob, we really appreciate the time, my friend. Stay safe and enjoy the draft.
All right. Okay, thank you.
We thank Bob Condata from the Seattle Times. Yetur Gross-Matos is off the board, and we head back to the East Coast to a good buddy. We've had many a drink at the NFL Combine over the course of the last decade or so, it feels like, and that's Garrett Downing, who is the team reporter for the Ravens website for the Baltimore Ravens. Garrett, good to hear your voice, man. Hope everything's good with you.
Yeah, great to catch up. I hope you're doing well. It's when I hear of the guy, Yetur Gross-Matos coming off the board right before the Ravens, he would have been an interesting option for them at 28. So it's Seahawks may have thought the same thing, and they just take care of business one pick before the Ravens are on the board.
All right, so besides pass rush, given what you just said, what other needs are you really looking at for the Ravens here in the first round of this year's draft?
Yeah, I think offensive line. Marshall Yonda, the right guard, who's probably going to be a Hall of Famer one day, retired this offseason, so that leaves a massive hole in the middle of the Ravens' offensive line. And then pass rush certainly is an area. And then linebacker. I think those are the kind of big three. Inside linebacker could be a position that the Ravens look to address in the first round. Now, the top 3 linebackers are all off the board already based on this mock. So that puts, that position a little bit in a difficult situation. And then I think there's an outside chance of wide receiver. A guy like a T. Higgins the Ravens could consider here. So I would think that if I were putting priority-wise, I think it's offensive line, it's linebacker, and then it's a combination of either pass rush or wide receiver.
Do you think, given the drop-off, I think most people think there is one at least, after Patrick Quinn and Kenneth Murray, that the Ravens might consider a move up here to try to grab one of those interior linebackers to be the centerpiece of that defense?
I think that there is a chance. I don't think they would go up too far. Eric DeCosta, the general manager of the Ravens, loves picks. And he's always looking, if things played out on draft weekend the way they have in this draft, I think the Ravens would be working the phones to try to move back. I think that's the more likely scenario. Move back, say, 7 or 8 picks, maybe out of the first round, and then try to accumulate some additional assets. They've already got a lot of picks in the middle. They've got 9 picks in this year's draft, 2 second-rounders, 2 third-rounders. But if they could add even more in that second, third-round range, I think that they would jump at that opportunity. So if the board looks like it does right now, I think the most likely situation would probably be work the phones to see if they can move back.
All right. Unfortunately, trading is not an option here. And like you said, the top 2 linebackers off the board, not a ton of top interior offensive linemen in this draft, not a great pass rush draft either. Wide receiver's pretty deep, though. So, Garrett, with the Ravens stand here, who's your selection for them at number 28 in the Giants Huddle mock draft?
Yeah, I would say there's 3 guys that I'd be deciding between. Zach Vaughn, linebacker from Wisconsin, A.J. Epinesa, pass rusher out of Iowa. But I'm going to go with the Michigan center guard, Cesar Ruiz. He could be a plug-and-play starter, can play center, could also play guard. So he's somebody, like I said, the Ravens want to continue to upgrade that offensive line, especially with the retirement of Marshall Yonda, and I think Ruiz would be a day-one starter. Likely they can move back and maybe try to get him, say, in the early 30s. But I'm playing by the rules here, so I'm just going to go ahead and take him and get a day-one starter on the offensive line here at pick number 28 for the Ravens.
Well, if they do want to move down and get Ruiz, I'll slide you a little secret here. And again, this is not inside information, but there's a lot of chatter up here that the Giants could be looking center at 36. So I would not move anywhere past there if you want to make sure you get your guy.
All right, good to know. I'll pass that along.
I appreciate it, Garrett, man. Good stuff. And we'll talk to you down the road. All right, pal?
All right, man. Talk to you later.
All right, we thank Garrett Downing from Baltimore Ravens team website. They select Cesar Ruiz, the center out of Michigan. We go to pick 29 for the Tennessee Titans. We welcome in Paul Kuharsky, who's covered the NFL for a long time. You can find his work at paulkuharsky.com and on the Midday 180 on 104.5 The Zone down in Nashville. Paul, thanks so much for being with us. Hope everybody in your world is safe and healthy and doing well. What are your thoughts here just in terms of the Titans' overall approach and their thoughts with where they are after making a bit of a Cinderella playoff run last year, picking at 29?
Yeah, well, it was a big free agent off season, and keeping Ryan Tannehill with the new contract and keeping Derrick Henry with the franchise tag, obviously the two big moves. Lost Jack Conklin to the Browns in free agency, but re-signed Dennis Kelly, who's been their swing guy. I think they still need a right tackle to compete with him, and that would have been in consideration for me here. Losing Logan Ryan, it appears, very versatile nickelback, and I think that's the biggest concern on the front line here. Played a ton, championship pedigree, very versatile. And so I'm thinking about Jeff Gladney, but I'm going to go a little bit off because you've got so many cornerbacks gone here. And if I'm not mistaken, you don't have any safeties gone. Is that right?
That is correct. There was a big-time run. You had four straight, cornerbacks taken from 19 to 22. A.J. Terrell, Christian Fulton, Trayvon Diggs, and Jalen Johnson went 4 straight picks.
So, I mean, look, there's still a good cornerback here in Gladney who I like and I think could be the pick. But I'm going to be unconventional and say getting presumably the best safety here, despite the fact that the Titans have 2 very good safeties in Kevin Byard and Kenny Vaccaro. I'm going to take Xavier McKinney from Bama, and I'm going to play him in the slot. In the nickel and the dime packages as very much a cover guy who's going to wind up on tight ends, on some receivers, and he's going to be a super versatile guy for the Titans right out of the gate, excuse me. And I'm thinking that that's a kind of versatile, new age NFL move that could pay off. I think he's got the skills to do it. He's an instinctive, full speed ahead kind of guy with range. He can diagnose stuff, and he'll put himself in position to make plays that makes it seem like he was a corner all along. And then, he can do safety stuff too.
Paul, they did trade Jarrell Casey, who's been a real good player for you guys for a long time. Any thought of the pass rusher here?
Well, they need edge pass rushing help. They have for a long time, but Casey's a defensive tackle, and his replacement actually came last year at number 19, where they made the big pick with Jeffrey Simmons.
Oh, that's right.
He takes Casey's place. They're not great on the defensive line, but for as often as they're in nickel, they're only playing 2 defensive linemen. That'll be Simmons and Daquan Jones, the veteran run stopper. On the edge, they've got a variety of guys now. Harold Landry and Vic Beasley, the headliners there. Beasley on a 1-year prove-it deal coming over from Atlanta. He's got some work ethic questions. Mike Vrabel doesn't stand for that sort of stuff. We're going to see a transformation, I suspect.
Final question. Any thought of a trade up or down here? If they were going to do one or the other, which one would you think would be more likely?
Yeah, I think down would be more likely, particularly on a board like yours, if they could still wind up with McKinney or Gladney or Bound, maybe from Wisconsin. Titans don't have a lot of holes on the starting lineup, but their second tier is not very good. It's not been long since 2 years ago they made trades up to get Rashaan Evans in the first round, to get Harold Landry in the second round, to get Dane Cruikshank, a backup safety later on, and then drafted Luke Falk in the 5th or 6th. They ended up with only 4 players out of that draft, only 3 who were on their roster. They trade up a lot, though they usually end up with the same amount of picks, but they haven't done well fleshing out the back end of their roster. At cornerback, where I'm talking about, they really have 2 guys in Adoree Jackson and Malcolm Butler, and after that, not just people you haven't heard of who aren't good enough, but not even bodies. And so they really need to replenish the rest of the roster. And they don't have a 5th or they don't have a fourth in this draft because of the Ryan Tannehill trade. They don't have a sixth in this draft. They have 3 sevenths. They need more middle range picks to kind of fill out some of the depth.
Paul, awesome stuff, my friend. Great information. We appreciate you joining us. Stay safe down there. We'll talk to you down the road. Enjoy the draft.
You too. Thanks for having me.
All right, we move on to pick number 30 at 29. Paul Kaharski selects Xavier McKinney for the Tennessee Titans. So we head to the NFC North to the Green Bay Packers, and to make the selection for them is Pete Doherty. He covers the Packers for the Green Bay Press-Gazette and PackersNews.com. Pete, thanks a lot for being with us. The Packers, again, another deep playoff run with Aaron Rodgers. What do you think they're thinking about here and their major needs, trying to find a player that can try to put them over the top?
A lot of needs. Probably the biggest is receiver, but real close would be inside linebacker and tackle, where they lost Brian Bulaga. They need a lot of things. They need a corner. They need depth at a lot of positions. This is a big draft for them, and there's a lot of ways they could go in the first round. They could take the best guy from among several positions and really help themselves.
So given all their needs, Pete, do you think that a trade down here, if they can find somebody looking to trade up, could be a possibility?
I do. It's every year it is, but it makes me think of the year when they traded back from 30 to 36 and drafted Jordy Nelson. I think that was in 08. And so they're picking 30 in this one, and it does seem like, with the depth at receiver, maybe when their pick comes, they'd feel like they could get a guy just as good, 5 or 6 or 8 picks later than where they are, and they could use the extra pick and maybe use that to move up in the second or third rounds for a guy that got targeted. So, yeah, I think while it's always a possibility, I think it's an even greater possibility this year than in past years.
All right, so before you make the actual pick, who are the guys that you're really thinking about that you think could be in major consideration given how this mock has gone, picks 1 through 29?
Yeah, well, with Murray and Queen gone, because I think those guys would have been real possibilities. It'd be interesting. Jordan Love's on there. I don't know what they think of him, but I know they've looked really hard at all the quarterbacks, and if they really like him and think he can be a winning starter in this league, I don't know how you'd pass him up. But you got Cleveland from Boise State, the tackle. I think that would fill a big need, and he's a pretty highly rated guy. And there's several receivers they might be picking from with Ayuk and Mims and Rieger among others.
All right, so Pete, let's make the pick here. Who do you select for the Packers at pick number 30 in the 2020 Giants Huddle mock draft?
Yeah, part of me is really tempted to go with Love, but I still don't see him pulling the trigger on the quarterback quite yet. I think that's a year or two away. So I'm going to go with Brandon Ayuk, the receiver from Arizona State. He's a really dynamic guy. They've got a huge receiving core as far as just physical size. This guy's a little smaller, but he's way more dynamic than anybody they've got. So that's who I'm going to go with. That's my best guess on what they would do with this scenario with the way the draft is fallen for your draft.
Who do you think would be the next wide receiver up after Ayuk from the guys that are left? Because as you mentioned, a lot of the guys left are big guys, right? Like T. Higgins and Michael Pittman and guys like that.
Yeah, and I don't think, they've got so many big receivers. Their whole core is huge. So I'm just not convinced that they would add another guy like that. They've already got 5 guys 6'4" or taller.
Do they really? Wow.
Yeah, they do. They could put out a really good college basketball team with us. I mean, it's amazing. The Gutekunst, their GM, just obviously really loves big receivers with a big catch radius. But I'm thinking, maybe Rieger. He's a really explosive player. I could see him being the kind of guy who they might be able to get if they trade down 5 or 6 spots. They might still be able to get him in the low 30s.
Pete, awesome stuff, my friend. I really appreciate the time. Stay safe out there. Hope you and your family are good, and we'll talk to you down the road. Enjoy the draft next week.
All right. Good luck the rest of the night. Thanks.
Thank you to Pete Doherty from the Green Bay Press-Gazette and PackersNews.com. They select Brandon Ayuk at number 30. Now we head to the West Coast to San Francisco. We welcome back in one of our double dippers for this year's draft, Matt Barrows from The Athletic. The 49ers had the pick at 13th overall. They selected CeeDee Lamb. Matt, now that you've seen what's happened between 13 and 30, are you happy with your first pick and based on what's happened since then?
I am. I think CeeDee Lamb is fantastic, probably the best wide receiver in the draft. There is still a receiver that I like a lot who's still remaining. That's Denzel Mims from Baylor. So if I hadn't taken the receiver at 13, I probably would have taken Mims at this spot, number 31. But this is a good draft. I mean, there are a lot of good wide receivers, a lot of good offensive tackles, a lot of good cornerbacks still left. So I think if this were the scenario, the 49ers would be happy.
All right, so right now, what do you consider the major needs after you've taken Lamb, and who are the guys you're considering right here at pick 31?
Yeah, I think the major needs are cornerback, defensive tackle, and offensive tackle. And I would consider Ross Blacklock from TCU a defensive tackle. I would consider Jalen Reagor if I still needed a wide receiver. There's some cornerbacks too that I like, but I think there are enough cornerbacks and defensive tackles later in the draft that I would go for that big ticket item, and I would draft Ezra Cleveland from Boise State here. Joe Staley, the team's left tackle, he's probably going to come back this next year for 2020. But he hasn't said that yet, so there's a little bit of mystery in the air with him. And even if he did, he's not going to be playing for very much longer. He's the longest tenured 49er on the roster. And this guy, Ezra Cleveland, is very Joe Staley-like. He's very light on his feet. And I think by getting him at 31, it's sort of a nice balance that you get that future left tackle who may need a year or two to develop. And even if Joe Staley comes back, you've got this guy in the first round, so that means you've effectively got him for 5 years. You could use that fifth-year option. So I just think it's a smart move. It's like I said, a big ticket move, a move that looks to the future, and I think that's what the 49ers would do.
And then rapid fire, this is a prime trade-down opportunity, right? Try to pick up another pick in the next couple rounds. I don't think the Niners picked to round 5 after this, or 4?
That's right. No, not until round 5.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, they have looked very closely at a lot of guys who are going to be picked in the second, third, and fourth rounds. And so I think that they expect to trade one of those two, if not both of those first-round picks, and do what the Seattle Seahawks did last year, which is just recoup a lot of those mid-round types of picks. And I think that, frankly, Ezra Cleveland would be a mechanism to do that. I think there are some of these teams that didn't pick an offensive tackle early in the top 10, who would want to double dip and hit that position again. So I think that would be a way for the 49ers to trade back maybe 5 or 6 spots and then get an additional second-day pick.
Yeah, and the Giants picked Isaiah Simmons at 4. They pick at 36. Boy, that seems like it could make a little bit of sense. We'll see what happens. Matt, we really appreciate the time, man. Thanks so much. Be safe.
All right, anytime. Thank you.
We thank Matt Barrows, covers the 49ers for The Athletic. We go from the NFC West up to the AFC West and the 2019/20 Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs. Matt Derrick covers them for Chiefs Digest. Matt, thanks for being with us today. Obviously, can't feel any better picking at number 32 in the draft. The Chiefs coming off a Super Bowl win. What do you see as the major needs for a team that continues to try to solidify around Patrick Mahomes?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, coming off a Super Bowl championship, you should have a team that doesn't have a whole lot of needs, and that's where the Chiefs do find themselves. They were able to get a couple of off-season signings, get some guys that came back from last year's squad. So don't go into this draft with necessarily a need for an immediate starter in 2020. But there's a couple of position groups that they definitely seem to be looking at. Offensive line is one. That's a group that they think that there's a lot of depth at. Same thing with the cornerback position. They do think there's some depth there. and linebacker. They're looking for some guys who can cover out of the back, who can cover, and help them out, especially with their nickel defense that they love to play. They'd like to have a coverage linebacker, somebody who can work in space.
You think a trade up or a trade down would be more likely for the Chiefs at 32?
Well, with 5 draft picks in this year's draft, they would definitely like to have some more capital. And so I think of any scenario that's out there, moving down is the most likely. And Brett Veach, as a general manager, doesn't like to stand pat. And he said before in the past that when he goes through his mock scenarios with his personnel group, they always think he's going to move up. But this seems like the best scenario for them to probably move backwards, especially if someone falls to that number 32 spot where someone at the top of the second round might be wanting to make sure that they can jump up there, get a guy, with that number 32 with the, they can keep a fifth-year option. There's a lot of value there. So certainly if someone drops late in the first round and the Chiefs think that there's a need to go up and maybe move 5 spots, they're not afraid to do that. But I think of all the scenarios out there, them picking at 32 is probably pretty slim, and I think there's a really good chance they move backwards.
So, Matt, based on what's happened in this draft, then, you must not be too happy because you said, either an offensive tackle, and you take a look, and 7 are off the board already at pick number 32. Ezra Cleveland, the most recent one. Cornerback, there was a run on those players early on in the draft. Not a ton left there, though there was one player that might stand out like a sore thumb at this point. And then the top 3 linebackers are all gone. So make your pick, 32nd overall selection, final pick in the first round in the 2020 Giants Huddle mock draft. Who do the Chiefs select?
There's one great scenario, which is that Jordan Love is still there. And if the Chiefs can find a buyer for Jordan Love, I think they're going to trade out of this spot. But if they stick at 32 with the options that are out there, and you're right, a lot of positions are picked over, I think they're going to go with Lloyd Cushenberry from LSU. They need interior line help. That's the one weakness on the offensive line where they really need some support inside. That's the kind of guy that can come in and start immediately. And that's one position group, that interior offensive line, that they need to provide more help for Patrick Mahomes. You saw that in the Super Bowl. So I think interior offensive line's a big need, and that would be a great get for them at 32.
Very interesting. I know some people have mocked a running back to the Chiefs at this pick. Is that a situation where if you trade down, you pick up a couple extra picks in the middle rounds, that's where you might hunt that running back?
Absolutely. There are some running backs there that are available, but I think that the Chiefs are in that camp that, they believe that running back is a position that you can find guys deeper in the draft. And case in point, every running back on the board is still out there. So I think they definitely feel that that's a need that they could move back. They do like the stable they have. They got a lot of guys. They've got some numbers back there led by Damian Williams. So they don't feel that that's a huge need, but there's, as the Kareem Hunt selection a couple of years ago showed, you can find great value in the second, third, and fourth rounds at that spot.
Absolutely. Matt Derrick from the Chiefs Digest, we appreciate the time, my friend. Stay safe out there. We'll talk to you down the road, and enjoy the draft on Thursday night.
Thanks a lot. Take care.
We say thank you to Matt Derrick from Chiefs Digest for making the pick for the Chiefs to close out our first round. Now we're going to do a few picks here in round number 2 before we get to the Giants at 36. And the Bengals lead off round number 2 the same way they led off the draft when they selected Joe Burrow. Rejoining us, play-by-play man for the Cincinnati Bengals on the radio, that is Dan Horde. Dan, your thoughts on picks 1 through 32. I know it's real tough to kind of think about and predict what might happen in an entire round. That's what you kind of have to do when you think about round number 2. Did it go about the way you thought it would, or is there any surprises you think sitting for you here at number 33?
Well, there are a handful of guys that I thought might be gone, but the Patriots and the Saints broke my heart when they selected Kenneth Murray and Patrick Queen back-to-back at 23 and 24. Those are the 2 guys that the Bengals are hoping somehow slide through the first round and make it to the top of round 2. So not necessarily thinking that's going to happen, but certainly hoped it might, and it didn't. So that scrambles the plan a little bit for Cincinnati.
So what other needs are you looking at for the Bengals here as now they try to build around Joe Burrow?
Well, the biggest need is linebacker, which is why they wanted one of those 2 guys if either slid. And now the pickings at linebacker become a lot thinner. You've still got some decent players there, but they are guys that have a definite strength and a definite weakness, whereas Murray and Queen are more well-rounded. So now the Bengals have to decide, all right, do you take a linebacker at a position of need, even though he might not be a great 3-down guy? Do you take a different player because maybe he's the highest player on your board? Or do you see if there's a trade partner to move down? honestly, if there were an opportunity to make a trade here where the Bengals would still get a second-round pick and somebody else's third, I think they would hop on it because they only have one pick in every round, and they definitely would like to have more than 7 picks in this draft. So if there's a trading partner that's willing to give up a third-round pick to move up to the top of round 2, there are quarterbacks that are still on the board that intrigue people. Maybe there's a quarterback-needy team that will do that. So that would be the number one objective for Cincinnati, but we'll see if there's a trade partner that's interested.
Would a wide receiver be an option here? Only 5 have gone off the board in a pretty deep class. A.J. Green, obviously, they franchised him. Who knows what that's going to be long-term, Dan? You have Tyler Boyd there already, who's a very solid wide receiver. Any thought to going just wide receiver here because that could very well be the best player on the board?
Very possible because of 2 guys that are still there that were not taken in the first round, Denzel Mims out of Baylor and Laviska Shenault out of Colorado. Both are first-round talents. I think both are guys that will have first-round grades on the Bengals board. Mims probably is a little bit of a better fit. He's more of an outside guy, kind of a poor man's A.J. Green in terms of his body type, and certainly had a tremendous career at Baylor. But there are so many wide receivers in this draft.
Yes,
You're going to be able to get a good one in the 3rd, in the 4th. I mean, you could take a couple of wide receivers still before this draft is finished, and I don't know if I want to take one at the top of the 2nd round when there's just such a glut still available.
All right, so Dan, let's make the pick, assuming you cannot trade down, which unfortunately are the rules that we're dealing with. And by the way, nearly every team in the last, I'd say, probably since pick almost 20 or 21, aside from the Patriots and the Saints, have basically said they would like to trade down if they could. So you are not alone in wishing for a trade down. Who did the Bengals select at 33rd overall, the first pick in round number 2 in the 2020 Giants Huddle mock draft?
The Bengals will select Wisconsin linebacker / edge player Zach Bond, 6'2", 238 pounds. First-team All-American last year, 12.5 sacks, 19.5 tackles for loss. They addressed the linebacker position, albeit with a guy that doesn't have the pass coverage skills they would ideally like to have at that position, but a tremendous pass rusher and hopefully athletic enough that he can improve as a pass defender.
Well, you just broke the hearts of some Giant fans who are hoping he might be that exact type of linebacker for them at number 36 if they go offensive tackle in the first round. In this draft, they didn't, so not necessarily a need. But if they go offensive tackle at 4, that could be a player the Giants target at 36, Dan. We really appreciate it, my friend. Thanks so much. We'll talk to you down the road.
It was fun. Thanks, John.
We thank Dan Horde, play-by-play man for the Bengals. They select Zach Bond with the first pick in the 2nd round at 33rd overall. Next up, a team we're hearing from the first time today, the Indianapolis Colts, making their selection at pick number 34, which they acquired in a trade with the Redskins last year, and a move up for Montez Sweat is Stephen Holder, who covers them for The Athletic. Stephen, we appreciate the time here. Obviously, the Colts are going to be waiting a long time to make this first pick, or are they? Do you see a potential trade up here maybe for the Colts to find somebody that plays a certain key position?
Well, I think it's interesting. That's always on the table. They have 2 second-round picks, so they have the ammunition to do it. And listen, the one position where you'd be interested in doing that is quarterback. And I just think Jordan Love being on the board is really interesting to me. Look, if the Colts still had their number 13 pick, which they traded, I don't know that he would be the pick at 13, but at 34, you got to, if he's sliding toward 34, you got to start thinking about it at that point. I mean, a potential franchise quarterback when you've got a 38-year-old starter in Phillip Rivers. I mean, that just makes a lot of sense.
Now, I think to call Jordan Love polarizing might actually be an understatement. There are some people that love him. Obviously, he has all the physical tools that you would want in a quarterback, but there's a lot of stuff not to like, too, depending on who you talk to. So do you have a feel for how much the Colts value him? Because it's great to say, this guy could be a starting quarterback, but you also don't want to use a second-round pick on a quarterback that you're going to have to dedicate a few years to, and then that could potentially set the franchise back.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. You hit it on the head. He is sort of your classic boomer-bust guy, I really think, because he does make some mistakes, and he's going into a league where those mistakes, they will make you pay for those on defense. And he's going to have to play a cleaner brand of football to play in the NFL and succeed in the NFL. But he's got a skill set that very few guys have. So, the question there is, who is he and what's he going to be? And that's just such a really hard question. But I do think the upside is so high. I will say this, the Colts are really intrigued by him. And I think just the skill set that he has, the strengths are so obvious that it might be worth the chance or worth taking the chance for them. So he would be a really interesting prospect for the Colts. They have to address their quarterback situation in the very near future.
All right, before we make the pick official, because I know where you're leaning at this point, if Jordan Love's not on the board or they failed to trade up to select him or another quarterback, what other positions do you think are a real big position of need for the Colts, Steven? Because really, they're an excellent team. With Phillip Rivers, I'm sure they're thinking, we can try to make a run here with Tom Brady out of the AFC.
No, that's exactly right. I mean, the trade they made with San Francisco for DeForest Buckner, look, they really think that I'm not saying they think they're a Super Bowl team, but they do think they aren't that far away from really being a team that makes some noise. So I agree with you. And then I would say one position where I think last year it really was an issue for the Colts late in the season because of injuries and just because of overall lack of performance. It was wide receiver, no question. And this is a great draft for them to have that need. They're going to be able to address that need. So I think, you're talking Denzel Mims, you're talking certainly guys like tons of guys in that first round, late first round, the early second round sort of region, T. Higgins and guys like that. So, they're going to have tons of choices, even into the third round. But wide receiver would be one, and then the other is always going to be pass rusher, just because that's always a need. But obviously that is not as deep a position in this draft, so that may be a tougher job to pull off.
All right, Steven, make the selection. The Colts, 34th overall, second pick in round number 2 from the Washington Redskins in the 2020 Giants Huddle mock draft. Who do you believe the Colts would select in this position?
So you know what? I'm going for it. I'm going to go with Jordan Love. I just think certainly you're rolling the dice, but the payoff, the potential payoff, is so high that for the Colts it's worth it. And I just think that he could be a guy who could be dynamic for a team for years to come. And if you're wrong, you're wrong. But if you get it right with this guy, the payoff is going to be huge. So Colts certainly need a long-term quarterback. Given Andrew Luck's decision, this would be a great choice for them.
Steven, excellent stuff, my friend. We really appreciate the time. Stay safe, and we'll talk to you down the road. Enjoy the draft.
Hey, thanks for having me.
All right, we're up to pick number 35. We thank Stephen Holder from The Athletic for selecting Jordan Love to the Colts at 34th overall. The third pick in round number 2 belongs to the Detroit Lions. We welcome back in Jeff Risdon, who's the editor of the Lions Wire, and does a lot of work on the draft, too. So I'll ask you some draft questions, Jeff, after we get your pick. But let's start here. You've done a lot of work on this draft. What are the big surprises for you from picks 1 through 34?
I think I was a little surprised at how quickly the offensive linemen all went. And not necessarily just the first tier, but the group after that, too. The guys like Austin Jackson and Ezra Cleveland. I thought they might fall a little bit further than they did. And to see them off the board already at 35 is a little bit surprising.
Yeah, 7
not
of
saying
them.
that it won't happen in reality, but my goodness, it was quite a storm on the offensive line there.
Yeah, also both centers, Cesar Ruiz and Lloyd Cushenberry, gone as well. A bunch of cornerbacks off the board, but not that many wide receivers, only 5.
Yeah, and that is a little bit surprising, and that's good for the Lions because they happen to need wide receivers, which probably tips where we're going with this pick.
Oh, interesting. All right, because I thought you might go somewhere else. All right, let's talk about this first. Lions needs. What are you thinking right here after selecting Jeffrey Okudah at 3rd overall?
They either need a pass rusher or a wide receiver. Remember, they do not have a wide receiver under contract after next season. And Marvin Jones and Danny Amendola are both playing out what will be their final years in Detroit. So they've got to get a long-term answer in. This is a great class to do that in. If Yetur Gross-Matos was there, he'd certainly be in consideration. If some of that tier of pass rusher was still around, it would certainly be a consideration. But it looks like the better value here is at wide receiver.
Interesting. How about A.J. Epinesa? How much do you consider him here, especially since he's kind of that power end that Matt Patricia from the Patriots lineage tends to like?
Yeah, and I like him a lot. And if I were making the pick, I would make him the pick.
Oh,
but
okay.
I'm trying to do what I think. I'm trying to do what I think they will do, and I don't think that they want to do that. I think they will find him redundant with Trey Flowers, who is the best player on their defense already. I think they'll want to get a little bit more variety under their defense. At least I would hope that's what they're thinking anyways.
All right, well, let's talk about the wide receivers that are left. Who do you like? Who would you consider here? And what type of wide receiver? Because there's a lot of different shapes and sizes in this class. Are you looking for the Lions?
You know, I'm looking the Darrell Bevel offense, the offensive coordinator. He tends to prefer guys that can make contested catches, can work down the field and work their way back to the quarterback. They do need a slot receiver, somebody that can work the middle of the field. I think that's somebody that can do both of those would be high priority. But this is a bit of a gray area. A guy like Justin Jefferson would be perfect here, but alas, he's gone.
Yeah, he made it far, too. Got to 25, but not much further than that. And since then, only Brandon Ayuk off the board. All right, Jeff, so I'll ask you why after you make the pick. Who are you selecting for the Lions at 35th overall? And I think Giant fans will be happy you're going wide receiver.
Yeah, they probably are. Yeah, and Ayuk would have been great, too, by the way. I compare him to Golden Tate, and Lions fans still miss Golden Tate. And so does Matthew Stafford, so that would have been a good one, too. I'm going to go with Denzel Mims, the wide receiver from Baylor here.
Interesting. Any consideration to either T. Higgins, who's a great contested catch guy, Michael Pittman, another contested catch guy, or a yards after catch guy who can play maybe some of that Golden Tate role in a Laviska Shenault or a Jalen Reagor? A lot of choices here for a wide receiver.
Yeah, and Shenault is very appealing. The fact that he can do so many different things, he can play out of the backfield if you need him to. I think that sort of diversity is hard to overlook. It's also tough to look past his injury history. This is a guy that's had a lot of little nagging injuries on a body that plays very physical. He plays similar to the way Anquan Bolden did. It's tough to keep your body in shape when that's happening, and he's already had some signs of that in college. So I love the guy, but I can't take that risk here. I went with Mims in part because they really clicked with him at the Senior Bowl. The Lions coached the North Squad at the Senior Bowl. He was there. He did very well. They seemed to have good chemistry with him, and he showed the kind of attitude that I think that they like to develop. He's the kind of guy that I think Matt Patricia is going to really value. And he can win outside, does have good speed, really good blocker. I think that will also matter. That is something that the Lions stress very heavily with their wide receivers is blocking ability. Might not be the most savvy way to win games, but it is something that they value.
All right, Jeff, final question before we say goodbye. Now you're sitting here, if you're picking 36 and you're starting from a blank slate, no needs, who do you think your best value players are that are left on the board for you right now?
Epinesa is at the top. He's a top 15 player for me overall. I think he's going to be very good. And I think he's got scheme versatility, too. He can play outside at defensive end in a 4-3. He can kick inside to a 5 and a 3-4. He can even play down at a 3 technique if he needed to in sort of a NASCAR package. So he would definitely be near the top of the list. Shenault is up there. Reagor is a good one. I didn't actually look to see, is Jeff Gladney still on the board, the cornerback from TCU?
Jeff Gladney is the last, and well, at least in my opinion, the last really kind of top corner still left.
Yeah, he would certainly fit in this range, too, because he's a very talented guy. He actually reminds me some of Darius Slay, who the Lions just got rid of to Philadelphia. And a guy, by the way, if you remember back, go a little history lesson here. Darius Slay was a second-round pick. He was the top of the second round. He was dreadful as a rookie. He got benched, and he deserved it. He came back and has been one of the best cornerbacks in the NFL ever since. I can definitely see that happening with Gladney.
Interesting. Trade down possibility here for the Lions, Jeff? I should probably ask you that before we say goodbye.
Yeah, I think they would certainly like to pick up another day 2 pick if they could fall back, 5 to 7 spots and get another guy in that same range. Some of the other wide receivers that we mentioned there will still be available in 5 to 7 spots. I think they'd love to do that.
Awesome. Jeff, great stuff, man. I appreciate you making 2 picks for us in this year's draft. A lot of work goes into this, and it all comes with fruition on Thursday. Try to enjoy it, and we'll talk to you down the road, all right?
I can't wait. Thank you.
We thank Jeff Risdon for selecting at pick number 35 for the Detroit Lions. He selects Denzel Mims, wide receiver out of Baylor, the 6th wide receiver off the board. And now we get to Paul Schwartz. We welcome him back. Pick number 36, the Giants' second-round selection. Well, kind of the reason we did this whole exercise, Paul, to kind of see who would be left on the board when the Giants got to 36. Seeing who's gotten selected in those last 32 picks, what jumps out at you? Anything really surprise you at all?
Yeah, what jumps out at me is I think the draft is basically over for the Giants, and, there's too many good players gone. Doesn't this happen every year, John? I always find this. The first round is fine, but then you get to the second round, and you start hyperventilating with all these guys you kind of feel like you know a little bit about get taken. And I always think sometimes, oh my gosh, there's nobody left. And then I think, well, wait a second, there's a lot more rounds to go. So it's, I would be very hard pressed to be one of these guys calling the shots with the Giants or another team, because too many of these guys go off the board, and I just get too heartbroken with these things. As far as, what have you have so far? 7 offensive linemen taken? Seven offensive tackles taken?
Yeah, you have the top 4, including Andrew Thomas. Then the Dolphins doubled up at offensive tackle. They selected Austin Jackson and Josh Jones to protect Tua, which makes sense. Injury-prone quarterback, you want to protect him. And then you had the final offensive lineman, Ezra Cleveland, go to the 49ers at 31. So there's your 7 right there. And both top centers are gone too. Cesar Ruiz to the Ravens at 28 and Lloyd Cushenberry to the Chiefs at 32.
Yeah, look, we don't know if it'll go that way. Everyone says that there will be a lot of offensive linemen taken. Usually there's a run on offensive tackles at some point, but this is, I picked Isaiah Simmons in the first round at number 4. And to show you where my head is right now, I think I'm already regretting that pick.
Well, and it's funny, because we recorded that first pick before Dave Gettleman spoke to the media on Monday.
Yes.
And then he indicated in that conversation that, I think the quote was, the depth of the offensive tackle position in this class made him maybe not make it much of a priority in free agency, right? And now, what does he mean by depth? Does he mean the really good guys at the top? Does he mean a later round guys that he might like? And now we're going to hear from Dave on Friday. We're recording this before that. So depending on what he says then, we might have a different idea of who we might want to pick.
Right. Now, I'm sure Dave is not going into this thinking, man, I gave those guys some real carrots to chase here, because he does not want to do that. I mean, my take from that was, he said you try to address as many needs in free agency as you can, right? Yep. Now, they clearly did not address the need for a center, and in my mind, a right tackle. I mean, Cam Fleming is a swing tackle. If he has to start, he has to start. But considering the contract they gave him, they're not looking at him as any kind of right tackle starting option unless something happens. So, given that, he knows that the draft is very strong for offensive tackles. He knows he's got the 4th pick. The Giants know they can get any offensive tackle they want if they just sit at 4 and take one, right? I mean, I don't think anyone thinks one of those guys are going to go in the top 3.
Nope.
So if they're in love with someone, they said, we can sit there, we can contemplate a trade down, or we can just take the guy we love and we'll say we think we should be set at either right or left tackle for the next 10 years, and we're not going to sweat it. It's a position of need. Everyone thinks that offensive tackles, if you want them, you got to jump on them early, right? I think in the league, by and large, most teams have an offensive tackle starting that was a first-round draft pick. I mean, that's just the way it is, Not about linebackers, probably not about safeties, but tackles. If you want one, you got to get one early.
Yeah, Paul, I think this draft illustrates that. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I'm agreeing with you, because you get to 36 here. Your top 7 guys are gone. Maybe you like Isaiah Wilson. I don't know, but no one left on the board as a plug-and-play guy at right tackle here. So all of a sudden, you got a great player in Simmons, but boy, you're still looking at maybe hole's the wrong word, but you have, let me put it this way, you have no one under contract at right tackle beyond 2021.
Right, and let's remember, we also spoke with Joe Judge since our first conference call. It's our first time we spoke making the pick, right? And, I thought it was very interesting what Joe Judge said about, look, you don't go into a draft thinking, we got to get the NFL-ready guy to plug in and play. The plug-and-play thing is, what he said is you always look long-term with these picks. Who can help you best long-term? He said, if you're looking for NFL-ready, nobody's NFL-ready. They all come in, they need the weight room, they need the strength and conditioning, they need the technique, they need to learn what the heck the NFL's all about. So that was interesting to me. And that, it makes me think that, look, they're not looking at these guys. They're looking to say, because, look, the Patriots, Joe Judge came to the Patriots, and I think the Patriots took great pride and had a lot of confidence that we can turn these prospects into players. So don't tell me this guy is a finished product from this big school. No. We're going to make him a finished product in time because we're really smart and we can develop these guys. And I think that's what Joe Judge wants to bring to the Giants. So, I'm not so hot and bothered over, Jedrick Wills is the most plug-and-play ready, right? A lot of people say that. Or even Andrew Thomas, right? The most plug-and-play ready. The Giants aren't going to care about that. They may have the guy start, but they're looking long-term. You can't look short-term with these high picks.
Yeah, I agree with you. All right, so before we review even more about what's going on here, given where we are, you pick Simmons in the first round. Based on who's left, and again, what are you thinking here, based on the guys that are left, Paul, in terms of where you would go at 36?
Well, here's the thing. Like I said, this is why I have, what's Tom Coughlin's great line? Remorse for opportunity lost, right? I already feel remorse for not taking the opportunity to take Jedrick Wills with the 4th pick, okay? Even though I think that would be better in the trade down, but still, okay, we can't talk for 2 days about this. So I took Isaiah Simmons, so now I have to be true to my picks. I haven't addressed offensive line yet. You know what? I don't know if I can take an offensive lineman here at 36. I don't know. Is Isaiah Wilson from Georgia, the 350-pound guy, is he worth the 36th pick in the draft? I have a hard time believing that, okay? So I'm going to pass on that right now. Can I take a center? I do really firmly believe the Giants can take a center high in the draft on the second day. You have 2 gone, right? So I
have Cushenberry off the board and Ruiz off the board. So a lot of people, depending on who you talk to, would have Hennessy the next guy, right?
Yeah, Tyler Biadasz from Wisconsin is he won the Remington Award. He was the best center, quote unquote, in the country last year from Wisconsin. He's got some physical issues that in this climate with not getting a guy in your own building are hard. He's coming off shoulder surgery, so I don't know if I can take Matt Hennessy there. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to make everybody crazy, okay? And I'm going to not take an offensive lineman again because I have to be true to the board, right?
Of course.
I'm going to take the safety from LSU, Grant Delpit.
Oh, Grant Delpit. Now, and we kind of talked offline about this for a second, and I just want to kind of get into more detail with you on it. Giants need a pass rusher. We all know that. And there's not a great draft for pass rushers, and Yetur Gross-Matos is off the board. He could have been in consideration. But A.J. Epinesa is still there, a guy that's had a lot of sack production. He kind of fits that power end profile that the Patriots have liked in years past. And, Matt Patricia has used those guys in Detroit with Trey Flowers. What were your thoughts about maybe going pass rusher with Epinesa at this pick?
Well, I actually watched him a lot in college. My son is a junior at Wisconsin, so I watched all those games. Wisconsin-Iowa is always a really good game, really tough game, so I watched that a lot. And I like him. I don't love him. I think he's kind of he did not test out well at the Combine at all, right? He was not great at the Combine.
Right.
He's a better player than he is a tester. Okay, that's fine. You need players, right? You don't need testers. We've seen plenty of guys who are great testers and they're not great players. So he was not great at the Combine with the height, speed, weight, measurable stuff. He's kind of got to me. I think he's a big effort guy. I think he gets the most out of what he has, but I don't see him as having a big upside in the NFL. I think he'll be good. I don't know if he'll be more than good. And so I'm thinking back to what Joe Judge said. Epinesa can probably come in and play, give you some snaps right away. He's very experienced from a good program. But that's not what they're looking for. They're looking for somebody now and for the future. What's his upside? I think he's he hasn't peaked, but I think he's closer to peaking than some of these other guys. That's why I don't love him there. I think that would be a little bit of a force for a pass rusher. And just like the offensive line at 36, it's a little bit of a force and a reach. And it kills me not to have an offensive lineman in the first 2 picks. That's why, if I could go back, I would take the offensive lineman, and then at number 36, I can take Delpit, and I say, okay, now I've helped my offense and my defense, and it's a little better combination there.
Now, you would slot Delpit in at free safety as your single high guy. Would you then maybe use Julian Love in the slot a little bit, move him back to cornerback? How would you kind of work that mix?
I would let the best man win. You know what I mean? I think Delpit is a single high guy. He's big. He packs a punch. He was better in 2018 than he was in 2019, but he had a high ankle sprain in 2019. He was terrific in 2018. I mean, he was terrific. And John, don't we see this? 10 years ago, I would not be picking a safety at number 36, right?
Yeah.
People just didn't do it very often. I mean, they did it with Kenny Phillips, the Giants. You had to be special, but it was kind of like you can get a safety. But now in this day and age, with so many sub packages, you need athletic, 215-pound, 220-pound guys who can run and hit and cover on the field. Delpit is he's good on the line of scrimmage. He's good deep. I think he fits very well with Jabril Peppers. Okay, that's what I think. He fits well with Jabril Peppers. And now, if Julian Love, in year number 2 develops, fine. We saw the Giants years ago have great success with 3 safeties on the field. Okay, so that's fine. You know what I mean? And also, I also have Isaiah Simmons on this team. So tell me something. Have you helped your defense now? Have you helped your pass defense now with Isaiah Simmons and Grant Delpit, right? I mean, you haven't fixed your offensive line, but you can argue that offensive line and a really lousy defense are the main reasons why this team hasn't been good the last few years. Now you have Blake Martinez. Now you have Kyler Fackrell. Now you have the
James Bradbury.
Cornerback Bradbury. Now you have Isaiah Simmons, and now you have Grant Delpit. Now you got the makings of, you put Patrick Graham in a room, the defensive coordinator, now he can have some fun. So we didn't address offensive line, but we made the defense a whole heck of a lot better.
Yeah, talk about the middle of that defense getting shored up with a single high in Delpit and a guy that can do a little everything in Simmons. If they still give up a lot of passes to tight ends, then you need to launch some kind of investigation because those guys should do a real nice job against opposing tight ends. So besides offensive line, because I know that's the obvious answer, and we've talked about that kind of ad nausea here, Paul, what now as you move to round 3, there's 36 picks. And by the way, would you look to trade down here based on who was left? Would that be a deal where you're like, look, let me move down maybe 10 or 15 spots, try to pick up an extra 3 since there is such a large gap between 36 and 99?
Well, I think I agree. 36 to 99 is a killer. It is an absolute killer. The meat of this draft is going on there, and you're sitting it out. So, if you could get a pick there, I mean, and I know Giant fans, when that Leonard Williams, what is that, 66? What is the Leonard Williams pick they gave up?
That would be, let me see, 36, another 32 after that. That would probably be 68.
60. I mean, that's going to be a killer. I mean, there's going to be someone on the board there the Giants fans are salivating about, and, he's going to go, and they're going to say, darn it, we should have that pick. So, and anything the Giants can do to get a pick in that range would be very, very substantial because I think there is when you can get, maybe Isaiah Wilson drops, maybe, or you can get a center. You can get one of the 2 centers, maybe, maybe Hennessy and Biotish go before that. Look, from 36 to 99, there's going to be a ton of players who the Giants have rated bottom first, second that are going to go, and it's just going to be a rough stretch there. That's going to be, with these guys all sitting at home, Joe Judge in North Attleboro and Dave Gettleman in New Jersey and Kevin Abrams in Manhattan. Sitting alone with no one to kind of comfort them when those picks come off the board from 36 to 99, they're going to feel very lonely.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, Joe Judge is going to want that dog next to him, a little stress relief with, Petner and all that stuff. He's going to need Abby's emotional support there, waiting out that pick between 36 and 99.
That's going to be tough, yes. The one picture I saw of Judge kind of sitting back on the couch and Abby, the 6-year-old golden retriever, kind of looking a little bit sad and depressed sitting on his thigh, and I said, boy, I don't want this image on Thursday of the draft because you got to kind of be upbeat there. They looked both a little weary of all the draft preparation. So yeah, look, they want to get a center. Maybe with that 3rd round pick they can get a center. But look, you can draft centers in the 3rd round who can come play for you, right? Look at the Giants have had. They won Super Bowls with guys who were undrafted or low drafted. So you can do it. So you can find one. Maybe Biotish would be kind of a diamond in the rough. Maybe he drops there because people are concerned about his health. But he's been a good player for 3 or 4 years in the Big Ten for a big-time running team. And, Jonathan Taylor didn't get all those 6,000-plus yards on his own, so maybe he can help Saquon Barkley get some yards for the Giants.
Well, final question, Paul, before we say goodbye. What's your thought on wide receiver here? And this is specific to the draft. Maybe I'll get one more general one. But would you try to target one, end of round 3, top of round 4, given how deep the class is? And odds are, when you get to that pick at 99, then they pick a little bit later, top of the 4th round, there's a good chance the best player on the board is going to be a wide receiver just because the class is that deep. Despite the lack of a need, we talked about Golden Tate a little bit older, Sterling Shepard, the injury history. Would you think about targeting a wideout in that spot if value met where you would like it to be there?
Well, I don't think it's that much of a lack. I don't think it's that much of a lack of a need. Look, is it the number one need? No, but as you said, look, we all love Sterling Shepard, but his concussion issues are a concern. There's no question about it. The Giants have to go into anything they do now looking at Sterling Shepard and saying, we hope to God that he holds up, but, concussions, you can't really prevent concussions, right? You can't legislate against concussions. You don't get them in practice most of the time, but when you're on the field, either you're out there or you're not, so that's an issue. Golden Tate is going into his 11th season. That is not a time when receivers that are normal, that aren't Larry Fitzgerald, basically, get better. And Darius Slayton was a real revelation as a rookie. So, it's a need. It's not the number one need, but it's a need. So I don't know if you target one there, but as you said, this is a very deep draft. So if they go in at 99 and there is a guy on their board who is a second-round pick as a receiver, and he's a bigger target maybe, I think they need a bigger guy. They need someone with some meat on his bone.
I agree.
Somebody who's 6'1", 6'2", 6'3". If there's someone there and they say, we like this guy can be a number 2 receiver for us. He can be a starter-type guy. You have to take him. Look, you have to get the best quality you can. And look, do I think, in my draft as I'm doing it now, that they don't take an offensive lineman in the first 3 picks? No, I do not. I got kind of pigeonholed with Simmons, and, you kind of have to you can't start chasing there. That's the problem is you can't start chasing. Oh, we need an offensive lineman. Let's take a tackle with 99. And the guy's a 4th-round pick, and you're taking him in the 3rd round. It's not a wise thing to do. So I don't think it'll go that way. But no, I think you have to grab them. You have to grab them, and there's not a lot of positions here that I would say stay away from. If it's a running back, you can stay away from it or trade down. If there's someone salivating about a running back, see if you can trade down and let him have the running back. But because you don't need a running back in the first 2 days of this draft. But any quarterback, you don't need him. Anybody else? Fair game. Go for him.
Closing statement, Paul, for you to be excited about this draft and to get to the end of it and say, boy, the Giants did really well. They really helped their team. They're going to make them a lot better next year. They're on the right path. What do you need to see when we kind of take stake of everything, either Saturday night or Sunday morning?
Okay, I think that's a good one, and it's one I can answer. It's not Isaiah Simmons at round 4, even though I love the player and I drafted him. It's okay, I know who their starting right tackle is, barring anything crazy, because they just drafted him, very high in the 1st round. Number 1, that gets me excited because I want to see Daniel Jones on his feet, and I want to see Saquon Barkley with the ball in his hands and not hit 3 yards in the backfield. So that's insurance. You have to do it. So that's number 1. You have to get an offensive tackle you think can play. You need a defensive impact player, whether it's Simmons, whether it's Grant Delpit, whether it's, what do you think of Kenneth Murray from Oklahoma? Maybe he's sitting there was he on your board at 36?
Now, Quinn and Murray, the 2 top linebackers after Simmons, went back-to-back to the Patriots at 23. They selected Murray, and Patrick Quinn from LSU went to the Saints at 24.
Okay, well, look, here's the thing. Every time we talk about the draft, right, and I mention someone to you or you mention someone to me, we say, I don't think he's going to be there. I don't think he's going to be there.
You never know.
And there's about 45 guys we mention that about, right? So,
yeah.
So I don't think there can be 45 guys picked in the first 35 picks, right? I'm not great at math, but I think that's true. So there will always be guys who will say, we didn't think we're there, so I think they need an offensive tackle. They need a guy who's an impact player on defense, and I think they need a center. They need to find a center who you can look at and say, maybe not 2020, but 2021, I could see him getting a little bigger and stronger and playing center. And then after that, you just fill in the blanks, and there'll be some guys that you're interested or not interested in. But that's what I would say. Tackle, impact defensive player, not a pass rusher because I don't think you're going to get one, and a center,
Paul,
future center.
I can't thank you enough for all the time. We really appreciate it. I'm going to miss seeing you around the building for the draft. That's always fun, have everybody there and kind of just waiting in anticipation. You rush into the press conference room right after the pick gets made, and there's some urgency. Instead, we'll just be chilling out on our couch, maybe having a beverage or two as we watch the draft, and kind of everybody will do their thing on their own, but it'll still be fun, man.
Why don't we do a Zoom draft, and we'll just look at each other, and with three other wise guys that we want to make, you have wise guy comments about after they pick or don't pick a guy, and we can do that, right? No, I think we'll be busy enough, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. It'll just be very remote from home and very strange, but it'll get done.
Good stuff, Paul. I appreciate it, man. Stay safe. Enjoy the draft. Hopefully, I'll see you soon.
All right, John. Take care.
All right, there you have it. Our mock draft completed for the Giants Huddle podcast. The first 36 picks. You see who the Giants wound up with, and it's going to be interesting to see on draft night exactly what happens. The one thing the draft is unpredictable. Hopefully this gave you an idea of where some players might go and who might be available for the Giants when they select at 36. I hope you enjoyed the exercise. I know I did. Thank you for checking it out. And of course, you can find all episodes of the Giants Huddle podcast on the Giants mobile app, on giants.com/podcast, and on all your favorite podcast platforms. You can find all the Giants podcast offerings at giants.com/podcast, including Big Blue Kickoff Live, which covers the draft every single weekday for a full hour, talking draft with you. Thank you for being with us. I'm John Schmeelk. We'll see you next time on the Giants Huddle podcast.